Hey everyone, welcome back. Grab something to eat, get comfortable, because today's story starts with a Japanese student falling asleep during a history lecture and waking up beneath Rome's war banners. Before sunset, one muddy well will decide whether he becomes useful or dies as a foreign spy.
My name is Renji Takahara. That morning, my biggest problem was staying awake while Mr. Sato explained Roman supply routes with chalk dust on his sleeves and rain tapping the windows. The classroom smelled like wet uniforms, pencil lead, and old paper. A map of the Mediterranean hung beside the board, with red arrows showing legions moving toward a war I barely understood. Sleep pulled my head down in pieces. First my eyelids dropped, then the teacher's voice stretched into a low drumbeat, and the scrape of chalk became sandals striking packed earth. Heat slammed my face. The desk under my cheek had turned into rough stone, and dust filled my mouth so fast that my first breath tasted like sand, animal dung, and smoke. My hands pushed against the ground. Pebbles cut my palms. Above me, the sky was painfully blue, and a brown road ran past wooden stalls, mule carts, and men in wool tunics. For 3 seconds, my brain tried to protect itself. Maybe this was a festival. Maybe the school planned some awful history event. Then a man beside me touched the sword on his belt. He wore a bronze buckle, leather straps, and a short blade polished by use. His beard was full of dust, his eyes hard, and his mouth formed words that had no place in Tokyo. A woman screamed first, then a boy pointed at my uniform, my sneakers, and the zipper on my bag. People gathered like crows around spilled grain, each step closing the circle. Japanese came out of my mouth too fast. Nobody moved with recognition. English failed next. The crowd only leaned closer, staring at me like my school badge was a curse burned into cloth. Someone grabbed my sleeve. Another touched the plastic zipper and jerked his hand away when it moved. A child laughed until his mother dragged him back by the neck of his tunic. My school bag was still on my shoulder. That small fact kept me from screaming. Bag meant contents. Contents meant tools. Tools meant a chance, even if my phone was probably useless. A shout split the crowd. 2 armed men pushed through with square shields and red cloth at their shoulders. The watching faces changed at once, as if fear had been given uniforms. Both guards stared at my hair, my shirt, and the strange rubber soles under my feet. One barked a question. When silence answered him, his hand closed around my collar. My palms lifted slowly. That gesture worked in every century, or so I hoped. The taller guard twisted my arm behind my back and drove my knees into the road dust. The bag was ripped away. My textbook hit the ground open to a page about Roman warfare. A guard saw painted soldiers, froze, then shouted like the book had confessed for me. My phone came next. Dead black glass reflected his face. He pressed the side button, got nothing, and held it by 2 fingers as if it might bite through his skin. The plastic pen caused the worst reaction. One guard snapped it between his teeth, spat blue ink into the dirt, and roared while everyone near him stumbled away from the stain. Poison. That was the word in his face, even if I could not hear it. Modern trash had become evidence, and every item from my bag made me look less human. A rope looped around my wrists. The crowd opened just enough for the guards to drag me through. Sand burned my knees each time I stumbled, and mule dung smeared my trouser leg. Beyond the market, a military camp rose behind sharpened stakes. Smoke crawled from cook fires. Men shouted beside stacked shields, and the rhythm of hammers carried over the ditch. History class had made Rome clean in my head. Marble, senators, straight roads, red capes. This Rome smelled of sour sweat, boiled grain, wet leather, and flies crawling over blood crust. The guards threw me beside a fenced holding area near the camp edge. Prisoners sat in the shade with cracked lips, rope burns, and eyes too tired to waste hatred on me. A wooden post stopped my fall. Splinters bit my shoulder. The rope stayed tight around my wrists, and a guard pointed at me, then at the ground, making the order simple. Stay. That was my first Latin lesson, delivered with a spear butt pressed under my chin. The word sounded sharp, short, and attached to pain, so my memory kept it. Panic wanted control, but numbers were safer. Food, none. Money, none. Language, useless. Tools, 1 dead phone, half a textbook, and a pen body leaking ink in the dust. The holding area had 1 water bucket. Men drank from it with the same cup, wiping nothing between mouths. Flies landed on the rim, left, then crawled over open wounds. Past the fence, mules drank near a muddy well. 2 latrine trenches sat uphill, their edges dark with runoff. Every afternoon rain would carry waste straight toward the water. My stomach tightened for a reason colder than fear. Several prisoners had the same sunken eyes, cramped posture, and dry lips. That pattern did not need Latin to explain itself. Dirty water, heat, waste runoff, shared cups. A camp could lose men before a battle and blame the gods, while the real killer sat in a bucket beside the fence. A prisoner near me groaned and folded over his knees. His body shook hard enough to rattle the rope around his wrists. The man beside him pushed the water cup toward his mouth. My shoulder hit the fence as I lunged. Bound hands made me slow, but my foot kicked the cup sideways. Mud swallowed the water, and 3 prisoners stared at me with open rage. The guard heard the shout and crossed the yard fast. He saw the spilled cup, the sick man, and my raised hands. His face made the wrong answer before I could gesture. A fist caught my cheek. Dust flashed white across my vision. The guard dragged me upright by my collar, shouting into my face while I pointed at the well beyond the fence. My finger moved from the well to the latrine trench, then down the slope. After that, both hands made the shape of a pot over fire. Boil, move, separate. Please understand. The guard looked where I pointed. For one heartbeat, thought crossed his face. Then suspicion crushed it. He shoved me toward the bucket as if I had placed sickness inside it. More soldiers arrived. One wore a transverse crest on his helmet and carried authority like another weapon. The others stepped aside before he spoke, so I marked him as command. The centurion studied the sick prisoner first, then the spilled water, then me. His gaze stopped on my uniform badge, my bound wrists, and the blue ink drying near the dirt. A short sword slid from his belt. The blade pointed at the muddy well, then at the latrine trench, then rested under my throat with enough pressure to lift my chin.
Renji had found Rome's first weakness, but proof in this camp required a body. The centurion ordered the sick prisoner dragged closer, then shoved the water cup into Renji's hands.
The cup was hard clay, chipped along one side, still wet from the bucket. The centurion pushed it against my chest and waited for me to prove whether I was useful or guilty. The sick prisoner lay between us with his knees tight to his belly. Sweat soaked his tunic, and every breath came with the sour smell of vomit and fear baked under the sun. A dozen soldiers watched my hands instead of my face. Bound wrists made every gesture ugly, but the well, the ditch, and the slope were the only words I had left. My fingers scraped a map into the dirt. Circle for the well, 2 lines for the latrine trench, dots for mule tracks, then a crooked stream running downhill into the water. The first guard kicked the drawing apart before anyone studied it. Mud flew across my knees. The centurion did not blink, but his eyes followed the slope beyond the fence. He barked an order. A slave boy brought a blackened cooking pot, a cracked jar, and a bronze ladle. Another soldier cut the rope around my wrists, then kept a knife near my ribs. Freedom reached only my hands. The rest of me still belonged to the spear points around the yard, so every movement had to look slow, simple, and too useful to stop. The guard shoved the water bucket closer. Brown grit floated on top. A fly landed on the rim, drank, then lifted off toward the sick prisoner's mouth before I slapped it away. Charcoal came from the cook fire. I crushed it with a stone until black dust stained my palms. Then I pointed to sand, cloth, and the jar, building the filter in pieces. Sand went in first, then charcoal, then folded cloth from a torn sleeve. The order was crude, but the meaning mattered. Make water pass through layers before it touched a throat. The first pour looked pathetic. Muddy water dripped through slowly, darker than I wanted, while soldiers laughed under their breath. Even I would not call that clean enough to trust. My hand flattened over the jar before anyone grabbed it. Then I pointed at the cook fire and made the same boiling sign again. Pot shape, flame shape, waiting shape. Drink after. The centurion understood sequence better than words. His jaw shifted once and the laughing stopped. He ordered 2 soldiers to carry the pot to the fire near the grain line. Heat did what language could not. The water rolled, bubbled, and spat against the iron-black sides while smoke stung my eyes. I counted heartbeats because minutes had no shared name. A soldier tried to hand the cup back too soon. My palm cut across the air, sharp enough to earn a shove. Boiling was useless if impatience poured death straight after it. I pointed to the shade and tapped the clay. Cool first. The centurion repeated the gesture to his men, and hearing a Roman officer copy my silence felt stranger than waking here. When the water cooled, he forced the first cup into the sick prisoner's mouth. The man coughed, swallowed twice, then curled around his stomach while everyone waited for instant judgment. Nothing changed at once. That almost killed me. Ancient men wanted miracles because slow evidence looked like weakness, and I had given them a process that needed hours to speak. The centurion grabbed my collar and dragged me toward the bucket again. His voice cut hard through the yard, and I caught one repeated sound attached to water: aqua, aqua. One word entered my head like a peg hammered into wood. Aqua meant water. The lesson came with spit on my cheek, a sword at my neck, and 30 men expecting poison. I pointed at the dirty bucket, then at the boiled jar, then at the sick man's cracked lips. After that, I touched my own throat and held up one finger for one cup. The centurion gave the order. Not trust, not mercy, just an experiment with a prisoner as the measuring stick. The sick man drank again, and my life narrowed to his breathing. They left me tied beside him through the afternoon. Whenever his stomach cramped, the guard looked ready to break my teeth. Whenever he slept, the centurion looked back at the well. By sunset, the prisoner had stopped vomiting. His fever still burned, but his eyes focused when water touched his mouth. Small improvement saved me from the club raised over my skull. The next morning, the centurion returned with 3 more sick men. That was how Rome thanked me. It brought me more bodies, more dirty water, and another chance to fail publicly. One man had diarrhea so bad his legs shook under him. Another could not stand. The third had a wound on his thigh, swollen around the edges and crawling with flies. I pointed at the wound first. The centurion pointed at the water. His world ranked thirst above infection, but the smell from that thigh had already turned sweet in the wrong way. The wounded soldier cursed when I came closer. He had the thick arms of a man who carried shields for a living, and fear made his hand close around my wrist. Dirty wool covered the cut. Someone had pressed ash into it, then wrapped it with cloth stiff from old blood. Every fly that landed there carried the camp in its legs. I needed clean water, boiled cloth, a sharp edge, and enough authority to hurt him before the infection hurt him more. That was a difficult sentence to say with my fingers. The centurion watched my gestures, then ordered the pot filled again. Soldiers muttered behind him. The priest near the cook fire stopped grinding ash and turned toward us slowly. I had seen him before, a thin man with white powder on his brow and a strip of red cloth at his waist. Men gave him space the way they gave fire space. The priest stepped close as the cloth boiled. He touched the ash bowl at his hip, then the wounded man's forehead, speaking in a calm voice that made soldiers lower their eyes. My fingers pointed to the ash, then crossed hard in front of the wound. Bad. Dirty. Stop. The priest's mouth tightened, and every guard nearby heard the insult without needing Japanese. The centurion said one word, short and final. The priest stepped back, but not far. His eyes stayed on my hands as if they were stealing something valuable from his altar. Boiled cloth steamed in the bronze ladle. I waited until it cooled enough to touch, then cleaned the wound from the center outward, dragging black blood and grit away in strokes. The soldier screamed on the first pass and tried to kick me. 2 men pinned his shoulders. A third held his knee while I kept cleaning because stopping halfway would rot him. Pus welled near the deepest part. My stomach pulled tight, but my hand stayed steady. A camp knife, heated in flame and wiped clean, became the ugliest scalpel in Rome. The cut I made was small. The smell was not. Thick yellow fluid ran over his skin, and several soldiers turned away while the priest whispered faster under his breath. I rinsed, pressed, rinsed again, then wrapped the wound with boiled cloth. No herbs, no medicine, no miracle. Just less filth trapped inside flesh that still wanted to live. The centurion assigned a guard to watch the soldier through the night. He also assigned one to watch me, which made sense. A useful prisoner could still become a dangerous one. Sleep came in pieces beside the holding fence. Each time my eyes closed, a Latin word struck me awake from somewhere nearby. Aqua, ignis, servus, move, stop, sick. By morning, the wounded soldier's fever had dropped enough for him to curse at breakfast. That single insult changed the yard. Men who had mocked the filter now stared at the pot. The centurion brought me to the well with 6 soldiers and a line of slaves carrying jars. He pointed uphill at the latrine trench, then waited for my answer like a blade. I walked the slope slowly, counting steps from waist to water. 12 paces to the first runoff channel. 8 more to the mule path. After rain, the filth needed no permission. My heel marked a new trench line farther downhill. Then another mark for a clean water area, separate cups, boiling pots, ash pit, and a place where animals could not drink. The soldiers hated the labor before it started. Moving waste meant digging in heat. Boiling water meant waiting. Separate cups meant remembering rules when thirst made men stupid. The centurion solved complaints with his vine staff. One crack across a lazy shoulder made Latin unnecessary. By noon, slaves and soldiers were digging the new trench under a white sky. I worked beside them because standing apart would make me look like a sorcerer giving commands. Mud filled my nails, and the first blister opened before the trench reached my knee. The slaves noticed. A foreign prisoner bleeding into the same dirt did more for trust than any speech. One older man shifted his shovel closer and copied my angle without asking. We built a drinking station from 3 jars, one for raw water, one for filtered water, one for boiled water cooling under cloth. I scratched symbols into clay so memory had handles. The symbols were simple: waves, charcoal marks, fire, then a cup. The centurion understood them at once. A tired mule handler understood them after one slap and 2 demonstrations. Problems appeared faster than solutions. The charcoal ran low, the sand clogged, men skipped boiling when guards looked away. A boy dipped a dirty cup into the clean jar and ruined it. I broke the contaminated jar myself before anyone drank from it. Clay shattered across the ground, and every head turned. The centurion's hand moved to his sword, but nobody fell sick. After that, I drew a line around the clean jars and placed stones at the edge. Cross the stones with dirty hands, lose the cup. Even frightened men understood losing property. 2 days passed before numbers began to speak. Fewer men ran to the latrine trench at dawn. Fewer prisoners curled over their bellies. The cook fire burned longer for water than stew. The centurion made me count the sick with pebbles. Before, 21, after, 14. The number was still ugly, but 7 missing stones looked like proof even a soldier could hold. He brought officers to see the pebble rows. They looked at the jars, the trench, the ash pit, and me. Some saw saved men. Others saw a foreign trick spreading through camp. One officer asked whether I could poison enemy wells. I caught enough from gesture and tone to understand the shape of the question. Usefulness had already grown teeth in their mouths. Another officer wanted me moved near his unit. The centurion refused with a flat word. Their argument taught me that being valuable did not make me safer. It made me divisible. The priest returned at dusk with 3 assistants and a bowl of gray ash. He walked past the boiling pots, past the new trench, and stopped where my clay symbols marked clean water. His assistant scattered ash over the jars. Men bowed their heads. The priest spoke loudly enough for the whole yard, then pointed at me as if I had opened a door for sickness. The centurion answered, but his voice had less force than usual. Spears could move soldiers. Priests moved fear, and fear traveled through a camp faster than bad water in rain. I understood only fragments: gods, anger, foreign, unclean. The missing words filled themselves in from every face watching me near the jars I had spent 2 days protecting. The priest dipped a clean cup into raw water from the old bucket and lifted it toward the sky. My breath stopped. If he drank and survived by luck, the camp would follow him. He did not drink. He handed the cup to a slave girl trembling near the fence. Her eyes found mine for half a second, begging me to solve a ritual I could barely understand. My body moved before strategy approved. I stepped across the stone line and knocked the cup from her hands. Raw water splashed over the priest's sandals, and silence hit the yard. 2 guards seized my arms. The priest looked down at the wet leather, then touched the ash on his brow. When his finger rose toward me, every soldier knew the verdict before I did. The centurion did not draw his sword this time. That scared me more. He stood between the priest and the jars, jaw locked, weighing 7 saved men against 1 insult to heaven. The priest spoke one final sentence, slow enough for the camp to drink each word. I recognized only gods, foreigner, and punishment, but the soldiers' hands tightened around their spears.
Renji had cleaned Rome's water, but the priest claimed the cure belonged to forbidden hands. At dawn, the camp would decide whether saved soldiers mattered more than offended gods.
Dawn came with smoke, coughing, and the priest's ash still drying on the clean jars. The camp had not killed me in the night, which meant Rome had chosen usefulness over purity. The centurion did not celebrate. He pointed at the water station, then at my chest, then at 2 armed guards. My reward was more work and a smaller circle of escape. Sick men still lined the shade near the fence, but fewer groaned over their bellies. That made the clean jars dangerous in a new way. Success had given my method witnesses. The priest watched from the cook fires while soldiers filled cups under my symbols. Every man who drank boiled water became a small insult to him, counted in clay and steam. By mid-morning, the centurion dragged me from the holding yard to the grain stores. The smell changed before the view did: old barley, wet rope, rat droppings, and sour bread. 3 storage sheds sat behind the command tents. Their roofs sagged, their floors were packed dirt, and broken amphorae lay near the walls where spilled grain had turned gray. A quartermaster shouted before we entered. He was round, red-faced, and furious in the way men become when numbers accuse them. His wax tablet shook in one hand. The centurion shoved me toward a sack split open at the seam. Barley spilled across mud dark with yesterday's rain. Ants climbed through it like workers who understood logistics better than Rome. Mold had bloomed inside several sacks near the back wall. The top grain looked dry, but when my fingers pushed deeper, the layer underneath came out warm and clumped. I pinched the spoiled grain, showed the black specks, then touched my stomach and bent over as if sick. The quartermaster slapped my hand away before the centurion caught his wrist. Their argument needed no translation. One man protected his storehouse. The other protected soldiers who had stopped vomiting because of a foreign prisoner with dirty hands. My eyes moved through the shed piece by piece. Grain near wet wall, bad. Grain raised on wood, better. Rat holes near the corner. Salt bags open. No rotation marks. The problem was not one rotten sack. The whole shed worked like a bucket with holes. Food entered, food vanished, and every missing handful became hunger during the march. I crouched and drew 3 boxes in dust. First for dry grain, second for suspect grain, third for ruined grain. Then I placed stones inside each box and pointed to the sacks. The quartermaster laughed until the centurion repeated my gesture with a sword tip. Slaves began dragging sacks into rows, and my dust boxes became the camp's first inventory board. Counting in Latin was still a fog, so fingers did the work. 1 sack, 1 stone. 10 small stones became 1 larger stone. 5 large stones became a scratch on wood. The system was childish, ugly, and harder to argue with than memory. By noon, 3 sheds had become rows of sacks, stone piles, and red marks on a broken plank. The total was worse than the officers believed. Grain for 21 days at current ration size, 17 if the mules ate fully, 14 if rain ruined the rear shed again. I did not know the Latin for disaster. Instead, my finger moved from the grain marks to the army outside, then removed stones until the empty space spoke for me. The quartermaster went pale when the centurion understood. A shortage hidden inside bad counting had become visible on dirt, and visible failure always needed someone to blame. His first blame landed on the slaves. Mine landed on the floor. I tapped the wet ground, then pointed to wooden pallets, roof gaps, closed salt bags, and older sacks up front. Rotation was simple. Eat the oldest first. Raise stores off wet dirt. Seal salt. Patch roof. Count loss daily. The ideas were small, but armies die from small leaks. The centurion made the quartermaster repeat my stone system twice. Each failure cost him a shouted correction. Each correction taught me another word. Grain, mule, old, new, rotten. Language entered my head as bruises, gestures, and objects. Aqua had come from a bucket. Ignis from boiling water. Frumentum came from barley dust stuck under my fingernails. By afternoon, another officer arrived with a silver ring and cleaner sandals than any man working near the sheds. He looked at the stone rows, then at me like found property. He asked questions too quickly. The centurion answered with fewer words. My name was spoken 3 times, each time with a different tone, as if they were testing ownership. The new officer pointed toward the marching field. He wanted me there. The centurion pointed to the water jars, the grain marks, and the sick yard. His refusal cut short. A third officer joined near sunset, older, thin, and quiet. He ignored the argument and studied my dust marks. That made him more dangerous than the one showing off his ring. His finger copied my ration scratches, then added a marching column beside them. He understood that food was not storage. Food was distance, speed, and how long men could obey. The quiet officer spoke one word I knew: service, slave. Then he pointed at me, asking whether a slave could count war better than free Roman officers. No one laughed. That evening, I was taken to the ration line. Men received barley, salt, vinegar water, and pieces of dried meat hard enough to crack weak teeth in half. The portions changed by habit, not plan. Strong men bullied extra handfuls from tired handlers. Sick men missed turns. Mules were fed after soldiers complained, not before roads demanded it. I took 4 pebbles and made groups in the dirt. Soldiers, sick, guards, mules. Then I moved grain marks between them until the centurion saw why shouting did not create food. A mule without feed became a broken supply cart. A sick man without water became 2 men carrying him. A stolen ration became hunger shifted to tomorrow's march. The centurion ordered a ration board made from split wood. Symbols replaced words again: helmet, mule head, cross mark for sick, jar mark for water, line mark for day. Men hated the board instantly. A rule written where everyone could see it stole the small crimes that made hunger feel negotiable. 3 soldiers cursed before dinner ended. One tried to take an extra scoop anyway. The centurion struck his wrist with a vine staff, then pointed to my board. Suddenly my scratches had Roman muscle behind them. That scared me more than the theft. A bad idea backed by force can kill quickly. A good idea backed by force can spread before anyone asks who controls it. Night settled over the camp with coughs, clinking armor, and mules grinding feed in the dark. I sat near the command fire while guards kept me close enough to use. The centurion placed a wax tablet in front of me. On it were route marks, supply counts, and symbols I barely understood. Then he tapped one column and waited. His demand was not gentle, but the problem was familiar. How many days could a unit march with this grain, this number of men, this mule count, and this water access? I used pebbles again. One pile for men, one for animals, one for daily grain. Then stones traveled from full to empty until the answer sat in silence. 6 days safely. 7 with hunger, 8 with dead mules, 9 with men abandoning shields to carry food. The centurion watched my fingers finish the last empty pile. He did not need my language to dislike the answer. His mouth tightened, and he scratched a shorter route on the tablet, then looked up as if daring the map to lie. The quiet officer from the sheds had followed us. He saw the pebbles, saw the route, and said something soft. The centurion stopped moving before the sentence ended. My stomach dropped. Officers did not lower their voices over good news. The quiet man had found a use for my counting that involved men outside the camp dying faster. The next day, I was marched along the camp perimeter with a guard on each side. The centurion wanted latrines moved, water paths marked, and traffic routes separated before rain. Roman camps looked ordered from far away. Up close, men walked wherever habit took them. Food carts crossed waste paths. Water carriers passed near hides, blood, and animal pens. I marked clean paths with white stones and dirty paths with burned sticks. Soldiers kicked them aside twice. The third time, the centurion made the same men reset every marker. Work taught faster than punishment alone. By noon, the water carriers stopped crossing the butcher area. By evening, fewer flies moved from meat hooks to drinking cups. A boy assigned to carry jars began repeating my symbols aloud. His accent bent the words, but the pattern held. Raw, filter, fire, cool, drink. A process became chant. That chant spread through slaves first. They had less pride to defend and more sickness to fear. A clean rule mattered more when your body was the first test subject. Soldiers followed only after results embarrassed them. One squad kept its jars covered and had no stomach cases for 2 days. Another left cups open and lost 3 men to cramps. The centurion forced both squads to stand beside the pebble rows. Healthy men on one side, 6 stones on the other. Pride bent under arithmetic more cleanly than under prayer. By the 4th day, officers came to the ration board without pretending surprise. They wanted water counts, grain loss, cartload estimates, and how long men could march under heat. Every answer made my cage wider and stronger. I no longer sat in the slave pen all day. I moved through camp with guards, tablets, and officers arguing behind my back. The priest still watched. He no longer challenged each jar directly. Instead, he blessed the clean station after I left, trying to place his ash on top of my labor. Let him, I decided. If ash made men obey boiling rules, ash could work for me. Survival did not care who received credit, only who controlled the next cup. That thought felt ugly. But Rome rewarded ugly thoughts when they reduced losses. By then, my mind had stopped asking when I would wake up at my school desk. A week after the well, the camp's morning rhythm changed. Fewer men staggered from sickness. Grain waste dropped. The ration board showed 23 days instead of 21. 2 extra days did not sound heroic. In a war camp, 2 days meant a delayed retreat, 1 more supply wagon, or a chance to choose ground before the enemy did. The centurion made me repeat the count in front of the quiet officer. My Latin was broken, but numbers bridged the ruins. Viginti tres. 23. His eyes sharpened. He placed a map on the table that night. Hills, river, valley, road, enemy marks. My textbook had made these shapes clean. His map made them muddy and hungry. The officers believed the enemy could only move along the main road. Heavy infantry needed width. Wagons needed firm ground. The hills were marked with a dismissive slash. I stared at the slashed hills too long. The quiet officer noticed. He tapped them once, then tapped the enemy mark, inviting me to disagree with men who owned swords. The slope lines were ugly but not impossible. A small force could pass without wagons if it carried dry grain, moved at night, and refilled water from the seasonal stream. My finger traced the hidden route before caution stopped it. Ridge, stream, goat path, dry basin, rear approach. The line ended behind the Roman supply yard. The tent went silent. Even the oil lamp seemed quieter. One officer scoffed, but his eyes moved to the grain sheds behind us, measuring how much fire would change the war. I added stones beside the route. Light infantry, maybe 200. No carts. 3 nights. Attack at dawn when guards changed, and smoke from breakfast hid movement near the rear ditch. The centurion's face hardened with each stone. The quiet officer asked a question and pointed to water. I answered by tapping the seasonal stream twice, then the basin. He understood. The enemy did not need the road if the land fed them just enough. A route considered impossible became possible once hunger, water, and timing were counted together. A scout burst into the tent before the argument finished. Mud covered his legs to the thigh, and one shoulder bled through torn cloth. He dropped to one knee, gasping. His words came broken by breath, but the room changed around them. Hills, smoke, tracks, enemy. The officers who had dismissed my line now looked at the same slashed ground. The scout placed a snapped sandal strap on the table. It was caked with pale dust from the dry basin I had pointed to moments before. My throat went cold. The quiet officer turned the map toward me. This time, no one asked whether a foreign prisoner had the right to speak. Every face in the tent waited for my next mark.
Renji had turned stones, grain, and dirty water into military language. Then, a bleeding scout proved the enemy was moving through the Forbidden Hills toward Rome's weakest supply yard.
Pale basin dust clung to the leather, and every officer in the tent suddenly understood that the hills had been lying. The quiet officer turned to the centurion. Orders moved fast after that. Horns called men from sleep, grain workers dropped their sacks, and torches spread through camp like sparks. I was dragged outside with the map still in my hands. Night air hit my face, cooler than the command tent, but the camp around me had already become hot with fear. The enemy force was small enough to move through the hills and large enough to burn the supply yard. That made them more dangerous than an army standing where Rome expected it. The centurion pointed to the rear ditch, then the dark ridge beyond the camp. Heh, his meaning was simple. If I had seen the route, I had to stop it. Seh. Stopping men was harder than finding them on a map. A line drawn in wax costs nothing. A ditch in hard ground costs backs, hands, time, and blood before sunrise. We reached the rear approach by torchlight. The land dipped beyond the supply yard, then rose through thornbrush and loose gravel toward the basin route I had traced. The Romans had placed a shallow ditch there and called it defense. To an enemy moving downhill before dawn, it looked less like a barrier than an invitation to step over. My fingers touched the dirt, then the slope, then the cart path. Speed would pull men toward the easiest gap. Panic after first contact would push the rest into whatever waited. A trap had to guide feet before it hurt them. I needed a false opening, a deeper ditch at an angle, covered pits near the gravel, and stakes where running men would bunch. Explaining that in broken Latin was impossible, so I used bodies. One soldier became enemy, another became guard. I shoved them along the path until their own feet proved the line. The first soldier laughed when I pushed him toward the false gap. He stopped laughing when loose gravel slid under his sandals and carried him exactly where my finger waited. The centurion saw it. More important, the quiet officer saw it. They did not smile. Men who understand danger rarely waste their faces on approval. Orders cracked through the dark. Slaves brought picks. Soldiers brought stakes. Prisoners were pulled from the holding fence, still half asleep, and shoved toward ground that needed teeth. The supply yard had grain sheds behind us. If the enemy reached them with oil and torches, the army would eat smoke for breakfast and discipline for dinner. I marked the first ditch with a burned stick. It did not run straight. Straight ditches look strong, but angled ditches turn a charge sideways and make men collide. The diggers hated the angle. Romans liked clean lines, square camps, and visible order. My marks looked crooked under torchlight, like a drunk child had planned the defense. One veteran spat beside my foot and said a word I already knew too well: coward. He pointed at the hidden pits, then thumped his shield, demanding a fight men could see. The centurion did not answer him with argument. He handed the veteran a pick and pointed at my line. Pride bent slowly, but command made it dig. Soil came up in clods. The first layer broke easily, dry and dusty. Under it waited packed earth that fought every strike and sent pain through wrists already blistered. My hands took a pick because watching alone would poison the work. The first swing jarred my shoulder. The third missed the mark. By the 10th, the handle had opened my palm. A slave beside me saw the blood and shifted his grip. Without a word, he showed me how to let the tool fall instead of forcing it down. Rome taught through bruises. The false gap came next. We left a tempting strip between brush piles and the shallow ditch. It looked like the fastest entry to the supply yard, which made it useful. Behind that gap, the real ditch waited at a slant. Shallow at the start, deeper near the center, with loose gravel spread where a running foot would trust the ground. Stake pits took longer. Each hole needed a sharpened point set low, then brush woven over it lightly enough to break under weight, but solid enough to fool tired eyes. The soldiers wanted the stakes taller. Tall stakes warned the enemy. Low stakes ruined ankles, dropped the front line, and made the second line trip over the first. That explanation became a demonstration. I broke a twig, placed it low, then pushed a sandal against it. The sandal stopped. The leg above it had nowhere safe to go. The veteran who had called me coward watched the sandal twist, his mouth shut. That tiny silence gave the workers more speed than the centurion's staff. We built fire breaks around the grain sheds by scraping away dry grass and stacking wet hides near the rear walls. An enemy torch becomes weaker when there is nothing eager to burn. Oil jars were moved from the outer shed to the center. That took 20 men and much cursing. Whoever had stored fire food beside grain deserved a week digging latrines. I marked bucket stations with white stones, then placed 2 boys there with orders to do nothing except refill water. A child with one clear task beats an adult with 5 vague ones. The quiet officer noticed the bucket line. He asked one short question and pointed at the boys. My answer was a hand chopping the air. Their job must stay narrow. Broad orders collapse under fear. Narrow orders survive. Carry water. Watch the left. Hold the torch low. Strike the man who falls, not the one still choosing a path. More Latin settled into my head that night. Fossa for ditch, ignis for fire, teller for fast. Every word arrived attached to mud, sweat, or someone shouting too close. Before midnight, the first trap misfired. A prisoner stepped onto a covered pit while carrying brush, crashed through and drove a stake into his calf instead of an enemy foot. His scream cut the work line in half. Men stared at the blood running down the stake. The priest would have called that omen. I called it proof the cover was too weak. We pulled him free and wrapped the wound with boiled cloth. Then I rebuilt the cover with thicker cross twigs near worker paths and thinner ones where the enemy would run. The injured prisoner gripped my wrist before they carried him away. He said something I did not understand, but his hand pressed once around mine like a warning and a thank you. Dawn would not wait for better design. We had 1 angled ditch, 8 stake pits, 2 false gaps, wet hides, bucket stations, and a line of soldiers who still doubted holes. The centurion wanted archers on the rear wall. I moved 3 of his markers lower, behind cart wheels and grain stacks. He frowned until I traced the enemy slope again. Men coming downhill would look at the wall first. Arrows from the obvious place draw shields. Arrows from the side enter ribs while the shield faces the wrong fear. The centurion accepted the change with a grunt. That was becoming his version of praise. He gave my idea to the archers in Latin, and they obeyed him instead of me. Good. My words still had no authority without Roman mouths. The trick was placing the right thought inside the right helmet before sunrise turned the enemy visible. The supply carts were moved to form a crooked lane. Not a wall because walls invite pressure. A lane invites choice, and scared men choose the path that looks least defended. We left one cart slightly open at the end, showing grain sacks. Bait should look careless, not staged. The enemy needed to believe Rome had made the mistake for them. The quiet officer stared at the open cart for a long time. Then he looked at me with an expression I disliked. He was not seeing a boy anymore. He was seeing a method. Just before dawn, rain began in thin cold drops. Men cursed because mud slows work. I almost laughed because mud also remembers feet, muffles movement, and makes gravel more treacherous. The first warning came from a crow rising beyond the ridge, then another. Birds lifted in a ragged black line, disturbed by men trying to move like shadows through wet brush. The camp held its breath. Cook fires stayed low. Shields did not clatter. Even the mules seemed to understand that noise had become a resource we could not waste. Shapes appeared between the thorns. Not a full army, exactly as predicted. Light infantry, no carts, packs tied high, shields darkened with mud, moving fast toward our tempting gap. My mouth went dry. Prediction feels clean on a map. Watching living men step toward a place you prepared to break their legs makes the body understand its own calculations. The first enemy scout saw the shallow ditch and smiled. He waved 2 fingers behind him. They believed they had found Rome's neglected rear, and that belief pulled them forward. 5 men crossed the false gap. The 6th reached the gravel. His sandal slid, knee buckled, and the line behind him compressed exactly where the angled ditch waited. The front rank tried to correct left. The ditch stole that choice. Men stumbled sideways, shields struck shoulders, and a hidden pit swallowed one fighter up to the hip. He screamed. That broke silence open. Roman archers rose from behind the grain stacks, not the wall, and their first volley entered the crowd from the side. The enemy did not collapse neatly. Real men do not fall like training pieces. Two jumped the ditch cleanly. One reached a cart. Another threw a torch that spun toward the shed roof. The boy at the bucket station moved before I shouted. Water hit the roof edge, then wet hides smothered the torch. His one clear job saved a month of grain. A Roman soldier cheered too soon and stepped past the safe stone line. The cover broke under him, and he dropped into a pit meant for enemy feet, snapping his ankle with a crack. Ugly compromise. Every trap that hurts enemies can hurt fools, friends, and tired men in the wrong light. I marked his fall in my head as the price of poor separation. The veteran who hated hidden pits dragged the injured soldier back by his armor straps. Then he turned and drove his spear into an enemy trapped chest-deep in brush. His eyes found mine across the ditch. He did not nod. He did not smile. He simply moved to the next marker and stood where my stones told him to stand. That was better than respect. Respect could vanish after one bad rumor. Obedience to the design meant the pattern had entered his muscles. The second enemy wave tried to avoid the false gap. Their leader shouted and pushed right toward brush I had wanted cleared but had not had time to shape properly. There the plan weakened. Two Romans panicked and threw javelins too early. One enemy unit slipped through the brush line and reached the outer grain cart with knives drawn. The centurion met them personally. His shield struck first, his sword followed, and three Romans behind him sealed the gap with bodies because the earthwork failed there. My trap had not won the fight. It had bought seconds, angles, confusion, and a smaller problem for stronger men to solve with iron. That mattered. A perfect plan belongs to stories. A useful plan leaves the enemy half-formed when your side finally has to bleed. The quiet officer sent reserves through the cart lane. They struck the trapped flank while archers kept firing from the grain stacks. The enemy's fast raid became a crowded retreat. Men running uphill on wet gravel lose dignity quickly. Shields tangled, packs shifted. One fighter threw away his torch to climb faster, and the torch died in the mud. The final break came when the angled ditch forced their retreat into their own fallen men. Roman spears reached over the lip, and the ridge swallowed the survivors in pieces. Silence after combat is never silent. Wounded men moaned, rain tapped helmets. A mule screamed until someone cut it free from a broken cart pole. I stood beside the false gap with mud up my legs and blood from my palm drying around the pick handle. The supply shed still stood behind me, smoking only from cook fires. The centurion walked the ditch line, counting bodies with his eyes. Enemy dead, Roman dead, wounded, burned stores, lost cartwheel, broken ankle, saved grain. War was inventory with screams. The veteran approached carrying a captured shield. He dropped it at my feet. A Roman curse was carved fresh across the wood, but the man carrying it had not reached the grain. His gesture made nearby soldiers look at me differently. Not warmly. Warmth was rare here. They looked as if the strange prisoner had become part of the camp's equipment. The priest arrived after the killing ended, of course. Ash on his brow, clean sandals, dry cloak. He walked past the stake pits and began blessing the ground that had worked without him. This time, fewer men bowed deeply. Some still did, because Rome had old habits. Others watched the ditch, the markers, and the hidden pits with more practical devotion. The centurion ordered the prisoners searched. One captured scout was dragged from the brush with an arrow through his shoulder, and fear packed so tight in his face that pain had no room. The quiet officer questioned him near the broken cart. I caught fragments. Commander, alive, boy, strange, not Roman. Each word landed closer to me than the last. The scout's eyes found my uniform under the mud. Recognition sharpened his panic. He spat a sentence at the ground, and even without the full meaning, I understood the target. The enemy had not come only for grain. Someone on the other side had noticed a pattern in the defense before seeing my face. That meant the war was learning me. The quiet officer made the scout repeat the sentence. This time he translated with gestures. Enemy commander wants the foreign boy alive. His finger stopped against my chest. The centurion's hand closed around my shoulder, not gently. Protection and ownership used the same grip in Rome. Saved grain behind me, wanted alive before me, guards tightening around my ribs. Across the muddy ditch, beyond the bodies and broken stakes, a horn sounded once from the ridge. Not retreat, not alarm. A clean note, deliberate enough to feel like a promise.
Renji's crooked ditches saved the supply yard, but the enemy commander had read the design. Before the bodies cooled, an order crossed the ridge. Capture the strange boy alive.
After the raid, the camp did not return me to the holding fence. That should have felt like progress, but the guards marched closer than before, and my rope was replaced by iron. The command tent stood near the center of camp, where dust was swept flat, and men lowered their voices before entering. My new sleeping place was behind it, beside a spear rack. Better food arrived in a wooden bowl, barley thicker than soup, a strip of salted pork, and vinegar water without flies floating in it. A guard watched every bite reach my mouth. Rome had upgraded my cage. The slave pen had smelled worse, but at least there I could disappear among tired bodies. Near command, every officer could find me with one shouted word. The centurion pointed to a mat near the tent wall. Then he pointed to two guards, the spear rack, and his own eyes. Sleep here. Work when called, escape never. My school bag was brought back after sunrise. The textbook was stained with mud, the phone still dead, the pen body empty. They had become relics from a world with locked doors. A scribe entered with a wax tablet and stared at the phone as if it were an insect trapped in stone. He wanted to touch it. The centurion slapped his hand away. That tiny protection told me something useful. They feared my objects, but they feared losing them more. My value now included broken plastic nobody in this century could explain. The quiet officer came next. He placed 4 tablets in front of me: grain count, mule count, sick count, and marching order. His finger tapped each one like a judge. The question was larger than before. Not how long one unit could march, how long the entire camp could move, fight, feed animals, protect sick men, and still reach the river crossing. Numbers were a cleaner language than Latin. I used stones for infantry, broken twigs for mules, black charcoal dots for sick men, and grain kernels for daily burn. The first answer made the quartermaster curse. He thought the camp held 30 days of life. My stones ended at 18 if they marched hard and fed the mules enough to survive. The gap came from habits nobody counted. Spilled grain, stolen scoops, weak sacks, guards eating twice, sick men needing carriers, and mules losing strength when feed was cut first. The quartermaster accused my stones before he accused himself. He grabbed the tablet, added marks, erased them, then stopped when the empty grain pile remained stubbornly empty. The quiet officer asked for a route version. I built 3. Fast march, low food. Safe march, more water. Forced march, dead animals by the 5th day and broken carts by the 6th. His face stayed calm, but his stylus cut deeper into the wax. A man planning war hates when arithmetic shows him the corpse of his favorite option before battle begins. By noon, I had earned a place beside the map table. Not a seat, because seats were for Romans. I stood behind the centurion while officers argued over my stones. They spoke around me like I was a strange tool laid on the table. Useful when lifted, silent when set down, dangerous only if some careless hand touched the wrong edge. The silver-ringed officer returned with clean sandals and a smile sharpened for ownership. He watched me arrange ration stones, then asked whether I could do the same for enemy stores. His finger crossed the map toward villages beyond the ridge. He wanted burn points, hunger paths, where to strike granaries, and how long enemy families could endure before soldiers deserted. Cold moved through my stomach. Clean math becomes filthy when the target changes. A grain shed for Rome meant survival. A grain shed for them meant children waking to empty bowls. My silence lasted too long. The officer's smile thinned. The centurion noticed and struck the table once, forcing the discussion back to Roman movement before refusal became visible. That saved me for the moment. It also taught me a rule. Rome would not ask whether knowledge should be used. Rome would ask how quickly it could be aimed. After sunset, the quiet officer brought torches, colored cloth, and 3 young runners. A raid had nearly reached the grain once. He wanted warning before the next one reached anything. Night signals sounded easy in my head. In camp, easy died under smoke, fear, bad eyesight, sleepy guards, and men who confused every shouting voice with an order. I started with 3 signals: 1 torch high for sighting, 2 crossed torches for attack, a low swinging torch for fire near supplies. More codes would become decoration under panic. The runners expected long instructions. Instead, they got repetition until boredom carved the pattern into muscle. High, cross, swing low, run to command. Repeat until feet obey first. We tested from the rear ditch. Rain mist blurred the flame. Smoke bent the light. A guard on the north post missed the first high torch completely and waved back like a fool. The centurion hit the post with his staff, then made the guard climb down and run the message himself. After that, every tower watched the torch like it owed them money. Watch rotations came next. 4 hours made men stupid near dawn. 2 hours made them resentful but awake. I drew a circle, split it into shorter bites, and pointed to eyelids. The officer understood fatigue when I made two guards hold shields at arm length. The fresh one lasted. The tired one shook early, dropped low, and would have missed a knife in fog. Rome loved endurance too much. It treated tired men as loyal men. My little test showed that exhaustion did not honor courage. It simply opened the gate from the inside. The new rotation spread across the rear posts first. Complaints came quickly. Men hated losing long sleep even when shorter watches reduced the chance of dying with drool on their chins. At midnight, the signal system earned its first breath. A low torch swung near the mule line. One runner sprinted to command before the smell of smoke reached the tent. A supply wagon had caught from an oil rag left near coals. The fire was small when the bucket boys reached it. Small meant boring. Boring meant the system had worked. The centurion stood beside the smoking wheel and looked at me through the dark. His expression did not soften, but the next morning he doubled the bucket posts without debate. Men started saying a word when I passed. I did not catch it at first. Foreign, maybe. Boy, maybe. Tool, maybe. The tone shifted depending on whether they had drunk clean water. Slaves used a different tone. They watched my hands more than my clothes. Hands that dug trenches, marked jars, and stopped dirty cups meant more to them than officers' arguments. An older slave named Deimos became my shadow near the work lines. He had a scar from ear to collarbone, one cloudy eye, and the practical patience of a man who had survived owners. Damas understood gestures faster than most soldiers. When I marked water times, he brought jars. When I split work crews, he moved the weakest men away from the heaviest loads. He also corrected me without permission. Once I assigned 3 exhausted prisoners to carry stones. Damos tapped their shaking hands, then pointed to younger men pretending to limp. That saved a collapse before it happened. Knowledge from the future did not tell me which slave had fever, which man lied well, or which worker would break after one more load. So I started counting people as carefully as grain: strong backs, weak lungs, infected feet, steady hands, good memory. A camp is a machine built from bodies that can refuse. The work rotation changed after that. Digging crews switched before wrists failed. Water carriers rested in shade. Wound men cleaned tools. Old men watched markers because memory still had value. Output rose by accident first. A ditch section finished before sunset. 2 carts were unloaded without a fight. The clean jars stayed full because carriers stopped collapsing halfway from heat. Officers saw speed. Slaves saw pain reduced. Those were not the same loyalty, but both walked toward me with questions, and every question made the guards stand closer. The quartermaster complained that slaves listened to my hand signs before his shouting. He proved the point by shouting while Damos calmly moved 6 men to fix a leaking grain roof. The roof held through afternoon rain. The quartermaster's face turned the color of spoiled wine. Saved grain had embarrassed him again, and this time a slave had helped me do it. That evening, Damas brought me a cracked cup of cooled boiled water without being ordered. A small act. In Rome, small acts near prisoners could be counted as rebellion. I drank half and handed the rest back. His eyebrow lifted. Sharing water was easier than speaking equality in a language where my own status still smelled like iron. The centurion saw the exchange. His face gave away nothing, but the next day he placed a different guard behind me, one who watched the slaves more carefully than the officers. My influence had become visible. That was bad. Useful knowledge could be stored in tablets. Influence moved between people, and Rome treated moving things as threats unless chained. The quiet officer requested another calculation 2 days later. Enemy pressure in the hills had slowed foraging. He wanted to know how long the camp could hold if supply wagons stopped. The answer needed more than grain, salt, water, mule feed, firewood, wound cloth, vinegar, arrow shafts, replacement sandals. War did not run out all at once. It frayed. I made a burn ledger from wax and charcoal. Daily intake, daily loss, reserve, spoilage. The scribe copied my symbols reluctantly, then faster when the officer saw sense in them. 3 days to strict rationing, 7 days before mule feed cut into movement, 10 before sick men became dead weight, 12 before discipline began eating itself from the inside. The general heard about that ledger before sunset. He was not in the camp every day, but when he entered, men straightened in waves before his red cloak reached them. He was older than I expected, with gray at his temples and a face trained to spend men without flinching. The command tent shrank around him as if canvas could feel rank. The centurion presented my boards, pebbles, and tablets. The general asked 3 questions. The quiet officer answered 2. For the third, every Roman eye turned toward me. He pointed at the enemy road, then the river, then our grain. Could we force a march tonight and still fight tomorrow? The room waited while my stomach counted faster than my fingers. I built the answer with stones. Yes, if baggage dropped by 1/3. Yes, if mule feed carried forward. Yes, if wounded remained. The last condition made the air colder. A Roman solution appeared instantly. Leave the slowest behind with guards. Save the army. My stones had opened that door, and the general's eyes measured how many bodies could fit through it. My hand covered the wounded stones before anyone moved them away. Then I shifted the march route to a shorter ridge path, cut tent weight, reduced spare poles, and reassigned carriers. The alternative was ugly but alive. Less shelter, slower setup, heavier strain on strong men, no room for comfort. The wounded could move if the camp chose pain over abandonment. The general studied the revised stones. He did not praise mercy. He praised efficiency because efficiency allowed mercy to pass through the tent without being named. Orders went out before dusk, tent poles cut, spare gear burned or stacked, grain loads repacked. Men cursed the foreign boy who had saved the wounded by making everyone else suffer. That was fair. Survival often moves pain instead of removing it. By the time the moon rose, strong soldiers carried heavier packs, and wounded men were tied into carts with water jars. Damos found me near the mule line and touched 2 fingers to his chest, then toward the wounded carts. Gratitude, maybe, or debt. Either one could become dangerous in a Roman camp. The forced march began under cloud cover. Torches stayed hooded. Wheels creaked over stones wrapped in cloth. The new signal runners moved ahead in pairs, counting shadows on the ridge. My feet blistered inside ruined school shoes before midnight. Roman sandals looked primitive until mud taught me that my sneakers were built for hallways, not ancient roads under load. The centurion noticed my limp and said nothing for an hour. Then he tossed me a pair of spare sandals taken from a dead man. Practical kindness arrived here without softness. Dawn found us near the river crossing with the wounded still breathing and the mules alive. The general's first look went to the carts, then to me, as if testing a wager. Scouts reported the enemy behind schedule. The fast march had worked because we moved what mattered and abandoned what looked impressive. Canvas and pride burned more easily than grain. The soldiers did not cheer. They slept standing, ate in silence, and cursed every missing tent pole. Still, when the ration board went up, nobody kicked the markers aside. 2 officers began arguing over where I should stand during the next council. Near the general for calculations, near the centurion for control, near the scribe for recording methods. None suggested near the gate for freedom. That absence filled the tent more loudly than any command. Rome had stopped wondering whether I was useful. Now it argued over storage. The silver-ringed officer returned after breakfast with a sealed wax order. His smile had polished itself into ceremony. Behind him walked 2 guards carrying an iron collar and chain. My throat tightened before translation caught up. He spoke to the general, then to the centurion, then gestured at me like a valuable animal whose temporary handling had become inefficient. The general did not like the collar. That gave me one breath of hope. Then he asked a question about legal claim, camp authority, and state need, and hope lost its footing. The quiet officer's face closed. The centurion's hand stayed on his sword but did not draw. Around the tent, men discovered sudden interest in the map, the floor, the lamp. Silver Ring wanted ownership written cleanly before battle made me harder to transfer. A foreign prisoner with no citizen name, no family, and no language could vanish into paperwork. Damas was outside carrying water when the chain appeared, his cloudy eye fixed on the iron ring. Within minutes, every slave near the ration line knew more than the officers intended. Work slowed, not stopped, because slaves who stop get whipped. But jars moved with heavier silence, shovels struck late, and men watched the command tent between each task. The general felt that silence. So did the centurion. My value was no longer locked inside my head. It had leaked into work crews, water lines, wounded carts, and saved stomachs. That afternoon, a supply ditch collapsed near the riverbank. The quartermaster screamed for more labor. Slaves moved only after Damas looked toward me and saw my hand signal. The delay lasted 3 seconds. In a Roman command structure, 3 seconds was a crack wide enough to show the foundation. Everyone saw who the workers had waited for. Silver Ring smiled like a man who had found his argument. He pointed to the workers, then to me, then to the chain. Influence had become evidence for confinement. The centurion dragged me behind the command tent before the officers finished shouting. His grip bruised my arm, but his voice stayed low, rough, and almost angry enough to be honest. I understood only pieces: serve, obey, Rome, safe, refuse, punishment, slave pen. He tapped my chest, then pointed toward Deimos and the water carriers. The message arrived whole without grammar. If I worked willingly, the camp used me. If I resisted, Rome would cut my influence by hurting everyone who had listened. My hands curled until the nails bit skin. The smart answer was obedience. The human answer was rage. Rome had placed both on the same table and told me to choose quickly. The centurion pushed a wax tablet into my hands. On it, the scribe had drawn marks for grain, water, watch, labor, a work plan, a surrender plan, the same shape. Behind him, two guards waited with the iron collar. Beyond them, Deimos carried jars while pretending not to watch. Farther out, wounded men sat in carts I had kept from abandonment. I could refuse and feel clean for one glorious moment. Then the lash would find backs that had helped me dig, carry, count, and survive this camp's stupidity. The tablet felt soft under my thumb. Wax takes any mark pressed hard enough. That made it dangerous. That made it Roman. That made it useful. My stylus moved before pride could stop it. First water schedule, then night watch, then ration cuts that spared wounded men, then labor rotations that kept Deimos away from punishment crews. The centurion watched every mark. He knew what I had chosen. Worse, he knew I had chosen for reasons Rome could exploit again. Protection had become another chain. When I handed the tablet back, Silver Ring entered from the side of the tent. He saw the fresh marks and gave a pleased nod, as if a stubborn animal had accepted training. The collar was not placed on me that day. That was the reward. The threat stayed visible, hanging from a guard's hand, iron polished by use and waiting for my next mistake. The general used my plan before nightfall. Water lines shifted, watch posts doubled, grain loads moved under guard. Slaves worked smoother because my marks had hidden them from random cruelty. Every improvement tasted bitter. The camp became stronger. The people near me became safer. Rome learned exactly which pressure point made my knowledge flow. Deimos passed me after dark and whispered a word I did not know. The tone was not thanks. It was heavier, a promise made by a man who owned nothing except memory. I wanted to tell him not to trust me. I wanted to say every plan I made now passed through Roman hands first. Instead, my fingers marked tomorrow's water count in dust. The centurion stood nearby, watching the same dust. He understood enough to erase it with his boot after Deimos left. A plan seen by the wrong eyes could turn into rebellion. That was when I saw the real battlefield widening. Enemy scouts beyond the ridge, officers inside the tent, priests near the jars, slaves near the work lines, me in the center, owned by need. The next morning, Silver Ring placed the sealed order on the map table. He tapped the wax, then the iron collar. His Latin was formal, but the meaning needed no translation. The general looked at me for a long time. Then he gave the centurion one command. The slave pen outside erupted as guards began pulling men from the water crews. Deimos was among them. His cloudy eye met mine across the yard, while a guard wrapped rope around his wrists. Silver Ring did not smile this time. He wanted me to understand.
Rome had learned Renji's weakness. Not pain, but people. To keep the slave pen safe, he had to serve willingly, while an iron collar waited for the day usefulness became disobedience.
Deimos was pulled from the water crew before sunrise. His wrists were tied, but his back stayed straight, and that made the guards rougher because pride offended them more than fear. Silver Ring watched me from beside the command tent. The iron collar hung from one guard's fist. He had built the lesson carefully. One useful boy, one slave pen, one choice. My answer came through wax. Water schedule first, ration order second, labor rotation third. I wrote until the stylus carved deep grooves, and every mark tasted like surrender. The slave crew was released after the centurion inspected the tablet. Deimos returned to the jars with rope burns on his wrists and did not look at me until the guards turned away. His silence landed harder than thanks. It said he understood the bargain. It also said he knew bargains made under threat were not loyalty, even when they saved skin. Rome marched 2 days later under a sky bruised with rain. The enemy had crossed the hills faster than expected, and the river valley ahead carried the smell of mud and trapped horses. The general believed the crossing was safe if reached before noon. My textbook memory disagreed. Somewhere near this river, Rome had lost men to a broken bridge and a flank attack. The problem was that my memory came from one sleepy lesson and a muddy page. Dates blurred, names shifted. The map in my head had clean arrows, but the valley had fog. Still, the shape was familiar. Narrow ford, low bridge, wooded bank, high ground to the east. A place where confident soldiers could become trapped while watching the wrong road. I tried to warn the centurion with stones. Bridge, forest, hidden men, broken retreat. He listened, but nearby officers heard only a foreign prisoner questioning Roman scouts. The silver-ringed officer laughed openly. He pointed at the river, then at the scouts returning alive. His meaning was easy. Eyes beat drawings, Romans beat frightened boys. Rain began before the vanguard reached the bridge. Not hard rain, just enough to darken wood and turn the riverbank slick. The horses stepped carefully. The officers grew impatient. The bridge looked stronger than it was. Two central beams had fresh cuts disguised with mud. My stomach tightened when a cartwheel struck one plank and the whole span shivered. My hand caught the centurion's sleeve before Rank could stop me. He nearly struck me for it. Then the second cart rolled forward, and the bridge groaned like wet teeth grinding. I grabbed 3 stones and snapped a twig across them. Bridge breaks at center, cart blocks forward, enemy hits side. The centurion stared once, then shouted toward the front line. His order was too late for silence, but early enough for life. The second cart was dragged back before its full weight reached the cut beams. Men cursed as the column halted. The general turned in his saddle with anger ready. Then an arrow hit the mud beside his horse from the eastern trees. A second struck a shield. The valley woke all at once. Ambush sounds arrive unevenly. First arrows, then horns. Then the deep animal noise men make when a formation learns the ground under it has become part of the enemy. The Roman front compressed near the bridge. Rear ranks kept pushing because news travels badly through helmets. The exact disaster from my memory began forming in flesh and wood. This time, the centurion moved before pride could finish killing men. He sent runners left and right, shouting the short signal pattern we had drilled near the supply yard. 1 torch high meant sighting. 2 crossed meant attack. In daylight, raised shields replaced flame. The system bent, but the shape held, and order moved faster than panic. I pointed to the shallow upstream bend. Not for wagons, for men. If the infantry crossed there in groups of 10, they could take the eastern trees before the bridge became a trap. The general saw the same answer after the centurion repeated it in proper Latin. His anger vanished into command. 3 cohorts turned upstream, boots slipping in mud, shields locked low. The enemy had expected a column jammed at the bridge. They had not expected wet Romans pushing through thigh-deep water toward the archer's flank before the bridge fully failed. That was the first moment history changed under my eyes. The ambush still happened, the bridge still cracked, but the Roman line did not fold around the broken center. The cart horses panicked when arrows struck their harness. One reared, kicked free, and nearly crushed a water carrier. Damos threw himself sideways and dragged the boy under a shield. I saw it, marked it, and kept pointing because men were still moving. War punished attention that stopped for gratitude. The next choice was already burning toward us. The cut bridge finally snapped under a loose cartwheel. The sound was enormous. Planks tore free, the front axle dropped, and grain sacks burst into the river like drowned bread. In the old history, that break had trapped the vanguard. In this valley, half the infantry had already moved upstream, and the enemy's killing pocket found itself missing bodies. The eastern trees shook as Romans reached them. Short swords met men who had planned to shoot from safety. The first enemy horn changed pitch, warning instead of commanding. The general committed reserves before anyone asked me. That mattered. My idea had entered the army's timing. The system no longer needed my finger for every step. Silver Ring noticed too. His face stayed pleasant, but his eyes followed each Roman unit that moved because of methods I had built while supposedly remaining property. The battle lasted less than an hour after the flank turned. The enemy withdrew into rain, leaving broken arrows, 3 banners, and bodies pressed into mud around the cut bridge. Rome cheered when the last horn faded. I did not. My memory said this place should have bled them white. Instead, the general sat alive on his horse, staring at the saved column. The centurion gripped my shoulder and squeezed once. Praise, warning, claim. With him, one touch could carry all 3 meanings and still bruise the same patch of skin. The quiet officer walked the riverbank, measuring losses. His tablet collected numbers. 23 dead, 40 wounded, 2 carts gone, 1 bridge broken, enemy ambush shattered. The number that mattered was not written. Hundreds who should have died were still breathing. Their breath moved through the valley, changing everything my future classroom had promised. That night, camp formed on the western bank under dripping trees. Men repaired shields, boiled water, and told the battle already larger than it had been an hour earlier. Stories grew around me before the fires dried my clothes. The foreign boy saw the cut bridge. The foreign boy smelled hidden archers. The foreign boy bent the river. Rumor made me stronger and less safe. A man can deny one officer. A camp will obey a myth until it asks why the myth should stay chained. The priest used that opening. He walked through the fires naming gods over the victory, placing ash on shields, and folding my warning into divine favor before soldiers slept. Let him steal credit, I told myself again. If men boiled water because of ash, good. If they crossed upstream because of omens, good. Then Silver Ring came with parchment. He did not bring the collar this time. That meant his attack had changed shape. Paper, seals, witnesses, legal phrases. Rome had sharper weapons than iron when it wanted ownership clean. The general received him inside the largest tent while rain tapped the roof. I stood near the map table with mud drying on my sleeves and guards placed behind both exits. Silver Ring spoke slowly enough for me to catch fragments. State service. Exceptional asset. Custody. Transfer after campaign. Protection. Obligation. Words polished until slavery looked administrative. The general did not answer quickly. He had seen the bridge. He knew moving me away could cost lives. He also knew Rome survived by turning useful things into governed things. The quiet officer argued for field command control. Silver Ring argued for legal control. The centurion said little, but his silence stood on the side that kept me close to the army. Nobody argued for my freedom. That absence no longer surprised me. Rome could honor courage, reward service, and still fail to imagine that a foreign prisoner owned himself. My own mind betrayed me by calculating benefits. Legal custody might prevent random execution. Field control might spare Damos. Formal status might give room to bargain later. Then the chain in my memory tightened. Better cages often begin as safer rooms. Rome had already taught me that comfort was a lock with softer edges. The general postponed the transfer. That was not victory. It was a delay stamped by rank. Silver Ring bowed as if patience cost him nothing, then looked at me with calm possession. After he left, the quiet officer placed a different tablet before me. Tomorrow's route. Enemy fallback options. Bridge repair. Casualty transport. War did not pause because men debated ownership. I worked until the oil lamp burned low. Every mark I made strengthened the army that held me. Every missing mark could kill men who had trusted the systems I built. The next day proved my memory had cracked further. The enemy did not retreat along the road my lesson remembered. They abandoned wagons, split their force, and burned grain behind them. A desperate enemy should have moved toward the fortified town south of the river. Instead, scouts found tracks east, toward poor hills with little water and fewer supply options. My textbook had become a map after an earthquake. The mountains were familiar, but the roads slid under my feet whenever I trusted the old lines too much. The quiet officer saw my hesitation and asked whether the enemy would starve. I moved stones slowly. 3 days of carried grain, 2 springs, 1 goat village, forced march possible. Possible did not mean wise, unless they had a reason beyond retreat, unless someone had told them Rome would pursue the obvious road and leave the eastern approach thin. The thought chilled me. I had changed the battle. The enemy might change next. History was not a dead script anymore. It was an animal wounded by my hands. I marked both routes, road and hills. Roman officers hated splitting attention. Command likes one answer because one answer feels brave. 2 answers feel like doubt asking for resources. The general chose caution after the bridge. Scouts went east, cavalry screened the road, and supply carts stayed under guard. My uncertainty had become policy, which terrified me. By afternoon, the eastern scouts found fresh fires, then bodies. A small goat village had been stripped for food and burned before the people could flee into the rocks. The survivors were brought to camp near dusk, women with soot in their hair, an old man carrying a broken door bar, 2 children silent around a sack of scorched barley. Silver Ring looked at them as information. The general looked at them as consequence. Damas looked away because slaves know what helpless people become when armies need answers. One survivor described enemy soldiers traveling without baggage, guided by a young advisor who spoke through interpreters and ordered water skins counted before bread. My skin tightened under the words. Counting water before bread was not genius, but it was the right answer for the hills, the kind of answer a modern person gives under pressure. The quiet officer noticed my face. His eyes sharpened. He asked the survivor another question, slower this time, and pointed toward me. The old man studied my uniform, my hair, my dead phone tied in a pouch at my belt. Then he shook his head. The advisor was older, he said, or looked older under a hood. Relief lasted 1 breath, then logic crushed it. Another person from my time did not need to look like me. They only needed knowledge with no ancient source. That night, the command tent filled with enemy reports. Cleaner camps, faster marches, supply raids that struck salt before grain, ambushes built around fatigue instead of simple terrain. Each detail could be coincidence. Together, they formed a handprint. Not my hand exactly. Someone harsher, less careful with civilians, but working from a rulebook too close to mine. I kept that fear quiet. Accusing an invisible future mind would make me sound mad, and Rome already had enough reasons to treat my knowledge as sorcery. The general ordered pursuit at dawn. The priest called the burned village a sign of enemy wickedness. Silver Ring called it leverage. The quiet officer called for more scouts. My route plan placed water guards ahead of grain carts, shield screens near the mule line, and night watch doubled at salt stores. Men obeyed because the bridge had paid for doubt. We found the enemy rear guard 2 days later near a broken ridge road. They had built a low barricade from stones and cart axles, placed just high enough to slow horses. Ancient soldiers could build barricades. That alone meant nothing. The spacing made my pulse climb. Gaps invited infantry forward, then narrowed at angles where javelins could strike exposed sides. The quiet officer saw me staring. He did not need translation anymore. He ordered the front halted before the centurion even reached for my sleeve. The halt saved the first rank from the side trench hidden under brush. A Roman scout tested it with a spear and found sharpened stakes waiting under wet leaves. Men turned toward me with fresh awe. I hated it. This time, I had not predicted the trap because I was clever. I recognized a thought process that should not exist here. The enemy rearguard withdrew before full engagement. Their goal had been delay, not death. That restraint also felt modern. Preserve trained men, spend obstacles, buy hours. After the barricade was cleared, we found 3 dead enemies left behind. 2 had wounds from the skirmish. The third had been killed by his own side, throat cut cleanly. He carried a short blade different from Roman pattern, narrower, heavier near the tip, wrapped with dark cord around the grip. The centurion kicked it toward me for inspection. I crouched in the mud. At first, the blade was only metal, scratched and stained. Then rain washed blood from the flat near the handle, revealing shallow marks carved by a steady hand. My breath stopped so hard it hurt. Not Latin, not Greek, not any ancient script I had seen in textbooks. The strokes were rough, but the shape was impossible to mistake. Japanese. 3 characters, cut into enemy steel with a point fine enough to bite, but not enough to make clean lines. The message waited there like a voice under dirt. The centurion asked a question. I did not answer. My finger traced the first character without touching it, because part of me feared the mark would vanish if skin proved it real. The words were simple, not a name, not a prayer, a warning carved for someone who might one day understand it. Do not save Rome. Rain struck the blade and broke into tiny lines around the letters. My old world had reached this one before me, or beside me, or from some direction history had no room to hold. The quiet officer crouched across from me. He studied my face, then the marks, then my face again. He did not know Japanese, but he understood recognition when it stole blood from skin. Silver Ring arrived late and demanded the blade. The centurion picked it up first. For once, he moved faster than law. He wrapped the weapon in cloth and held it against his own chest. That single action told me he knew the blade mattered more than metal. It also told me he had decided, at least for now, that the mystery belonged to the battlefield, not paperwork. The general summoned me before sunset. The blade lay on the map between us. Roads, rivers, enemy marks, and 3 Japanese characters divided the tent more cleanly than a wall. He pointed at the script, then at me. Explain. 1 Latin word, heavy enough to bend the air. I had no safe answer, only dangerous pieces. Another outsider. Modern knowledge, enemy advisor, changed history. None of those ideas had Latin simple enough for my mouth, and none would make Rome less eager to own me. I took a charcoal stick and wrote my name in Japanese beside the carved warning, Renji Takahara. Then I pointed at the blade, shook my head, and drew a second human figure. The tent went still. The quiet officer understood first. His hand moved to the enemy camp mark. The general followed. The centurion's grip tightened on his sword hilt. Huh. Silver Ring smiled without warmth. To him, another strange mind did not make me less valuable. It made me urgent. A weapon was useful. The only interpreter of an enemy weapon was priceless. Outside, soldiers repaired carts under red evening light. The slave crews filled clean jars. The camp moved because of systems I had built, while another system moved against us from the hills. My history lessons were no longer shelter. The future had become a contested supply line, and someone ahead of me had burned villages, copied tactics, and left a message in my language. The general pushed the blade closer. His order came through the quiet officer this time, carefully shaped so I could not pretend confusion. Find the mind behind this before it finds us.
Renji had saved Rome from a defeat that history remembered, but the timeline broke around the victory. On a captured blade, 3 carved Japanese words waited for him. Do not save Rome.
Japanese warning on the blade turned the command tent into a smaller, colder place. Every Roman saw captured metal. I saw a door open from my classroom into the enemy camp. The general did not let the blade leave his table after that. Guards remained at both exits, and Silver Ring looked pleased, because mysteries always made chains easier to justify. Morning brought a patrol report from the eastern ridge. 3 Romans had vanished near a goat path we had marked safe 2 days earlier, and only one shield rolled back downhill. The shield was split along the rim, with thornbrush tied through the handle. Someone had placed it where our scouts would stop, lift it, and expose their legs to the ditch below. That was the first copied sentence in the enemy's new language. Bait, pause, forced posture, low injury. My own trap logic had crossed the valley and returned with sharper teeth. The centurion watched my face while the wounded scout described the scene. He no longer needed perfect Latin from me. Recognition had become its own kind of confession. We reached the goat path under clouded light. Mud held prints beside the brush. Too many for one scout, too shallow for a full unit. The enemy had sent a teaching party. A trench waited under loose leaves at ankle depth, angled toward a patch of blackened stones. Fall there, twist, roll, and the next man stopped where arrows knew the distance. My old designs aimed to break movement and spare supplies. This version aimed to injure, delay rescue, and drag helpers into a second kill zone with cleaner math. The quiet officer crouched near the trench and touched the spacing between stakes. He understood enough to be disturbed. Rome could recognize skill even when it hated the source. A Roman scout had survived because rain softened the edge. His calf was torn, not severed. Bad luck for the trap, good luck for the man, and fresh data for the enemy. I scraped a counterline in mud, showing where a cautious patrol should move. Wider spacing, probe poles, one man above the brush while another tested the ground from the side. The centurion ordered every scout to carry a long stick before entering narrow ground. Veterans mocked it for 10 breaths, until the injured man showed the stake teeth inside his leg. Mockery ended fast. Pain teaches faster when the student can smell his own blood. By noon, probe sticks became camp issue, ugly and useful enough to survive Roman pride. The quiet officer wanted a prisoner. Designs could reveal habits, but a mouth might reveal the hand. 2 patrols went east, carrying my route marks and twice the usual water. They returned at dusk with one enemy fighter bound to a mule pole. He was young, mud-caked, and furious enough to spit at the priest before noticing the general's red cloak. The interrogation began beside the ration board. That was deliberate. The general wanted the prisoner to see clean jars, wound cloth, and an army recovering from old weaknesses. Fear entered the prisoner's face only when he saw me. My uniform had been patched with Roman cloth, but the shape remained wrong enough for every rumor to grip it. The quiet officer asked about the advisor. The prisoner resisted until the centurion placed the captured blade on the table, wrapped in cloth except for the Japanese warning. His eyes betrayed the answer before his mouth did. He knew the script mattered. He had seen other marks like it, maybe on tablets, maps, or orders he could not read. Words came in broken pieces: hood, young face, harsh voice through interpreters, counts waterskins before bread, burns villages that slow the march, punishes waste harder than cowardice. Each fragment narrowed the impossible into a person. Another outsider stood behind enemy lines, translating future logic into ancient cruelty with better language support than mine. The prisoner called him the Ash Scribe, not a name, more a camp nickname. He wrote with blackened sticks on pale wood and made commanders obey numbers they disliked. Silver Ring looked from the prisoner to me. His expression asked whether all people from my world turned armies into machines. The answer stayed trapped behind my teeth. The general ordered the prisoner held alive. Useful mouths were not to be cut yet. Rome could be patient when information had more value breathing than bleeding. That night, the blade lay near my sleeping mat under guard. The centurion allowed it close enough for me to see the letters, far enough that stealing it meant death. Sleep refused me. Rain tapped canvas while the warning repeated behind my eyes. Do not save Rome. 3 words, simple as a command, heavy as a hand around my throat. Maybe the Ash Scribe hated Rome for the same reasons I feared it. Chains, law, ownership, men turned into tools. That thought had weight, and I hated that it did. Then the burned goat village returned to memory. Children silent around scorched barley, water counted, civilians spent, movement optimized. Freedom built on that math would rot early. Before dawn, I wrote 3 Japanese characters in the dirt beside my mat. Why? Then my heel erased them before any Roman could ask what shape my fear had taken. The enemy answered before I sent anything. A dead scout was found near the north path at sunrise, hands tied, mouth packed with ash, and bark tucked under his belt. The bark carried Japanese writing, cramped but clear. Renji Takahara, so he knew my name or guessed from signs. The next line made the tent colder than the morning rain. Rome will chain you after victory. I already saw their law. Break them from inside or get out of my way. The words were harsh, practical, and written by a living hand. My fingers shook once before folding still. Silver Ring demanded translation. The general demanded truth. The centurion watched my face, knowing both demands could become traps. I translated the first part. He knew my name. I translated the warning about chains. I hid the final threat, because Rome needed less reason to test my loyalty. Silver Ring noticed the missing length at once. A lawyer's eyes count silence as well as words. He tapped the bark, then my chest, then the iron collar near the tent pole. The general cut him off with one order. Field problem first, legal problem later. That was not mercy. It was priority, and today priority kept the collar from my neck. The quiet officer asked what the message meant tactically. That question steadied me. Tactics had edges. Emotions spread everywhere. Edges could be gripped. The ash scribe wanted pressure, not conversation. By naming me, he forced Rome to distrust me. By warning me, he offered a door. By killing a scout, he proved the door had teeth. My countermeasure began with boring rules. No single scouts, no obvious routes. Burned bark messages handled with tongs. Prisoners searched twice. Water counted before patrol. Men groaned at the extra steps. The centurion made one squad repeat the north path under probe rules. They found a second bark strip tied under a stone where a curious man would kneel. Beneath the stone waited a spring trap with a sharpened bone needle smeared in filth. Tiny wound, slow fever, no heroic death. The trap had been built by someone who understood infection. The priest called it demon work. For once, nobody argued loudly. A trap that kills through dirt and time feels like a curse to men who have only recently learned to boil cloth. I saw something else. The ash scribe had watched my sanitation methods and inverted them. Clean water saved men, dirty needles spent them days later. The quiet officer understood enough to cover the needle in a clay cup rather than touch it. Progress, ugly and real. Rome was learning hygiene because the enemy weaponized filth. We needed to speak to the other outsider without handing him the camp. That meant choosing a message location, a controlled route, and a reply short enough to survive theft. I wrote on bark in Japanese while 3 Romans watched every stroke like it might summon lightning. My message held 4 words. Who are you? Why Rome? The centurion wanted more. The general wanted bait. Silver Ring wanted a confession. I kept the bark short because long messages give clever enemies more rope. We placed it under a marked stone near the goat path, then withdrew to a ridge where 2 scouts could watch from brush. The waiting felt worse than digging under arrows. By midday, a boy no older than 12 approached the stone with a goat bell in one hand. He limped badly and carried no weapon. Everyone wanted to believe that made him harmless. My hand stopped the nearest archer. The boy never touched the stone. He dropped the bell beside it and walked away, dragging one foot too carefully through the mud. The goat bell rang once after he left. Then smoke hissed from inside the hollow brass. Powder, ember, maybe crushed pitch, enough to mark watchers if they rushed forward. Clever. The boy was bait, the bell was signal, and the untouched stone told the ash scribe we had discipline. A conversation had begun, and he had spoken with a child's limp. The quiet officer smiled without humor. He understood now. This was not hunting a ghost. This was playing a board game where each move could cut a real throat. We moved positions before opening the bell. Inside was a folded scrap wrapped in waxed leaf. Japanese again, written smaller this time, each stroke impatient but controlled. Soda Arakawa, the message said. College student. Woke 6 months before you. Sold twice. Escaped once. Rome buys people with law. I will burn every road that feeds it. The name made him human, which made him worse. A faceless enemy can be placed outside pity. Soda had age, memory, and reasons sharp enough to wound through paper. The last line changed the room around me. You save soldiers who will enslave others tomorrow. Count that honestly. The blade in that sentence found bone. The general demanded translation. This time, most of it crossed over. Soda's name, arrival, hatred of Rome, intent to burn roads. The accusation stayed softer than the ink. The softening failed. Even translated carefully, the message struck the camp's pride. Men who had drunk my clean water bristled at being called tomorrow's enslavers. Damas heard the rumor before sunset. He found me near the water jars and touched the rope burns on his wrists. Then he looked toward the Roman tents and said Soda's name slowly. A slave did not need Japanese to understand the argument. Rome had chained him yesterday. Soda burned villages today. Between them stood my clean water, which did not answer enough. That night, the enemy tested us. A small raid struck the eastern picket with copied torch signals, using one high flame to imitate our sighting code before slipping toward the mule line. The north tower almost believed it. Almost. Then a runner noticed the flame height was wrong, too steady, held by a shield instead of a hand. He blew the horn twice. The raid hit prepared spears instead of sleeping mules. Still, 2 animals died, 1 cart burned, and an enemy knife cut the rope on a salt wagon before the attackers withdrew. Soda had not tried to win the night. He had tested our recognition. False code, partial damage, clean withdrawal. A probe disguised as attack, priced low and measured carefully. The general wanted pursuit at once. My hand went to the map before permission. Pursuit after a failed raid was exactly where I would place the second lesson. We found it anyway because anger outruns caution. A Roman squad chased tracks into reeds near the river and triggered a rope snare that lifted the front man by the ankle. The snare itself was simple. The arrows waiting for anyone who rushed to cut him down were the lesson. 1 helper died, another took a shaft through the arm before shields closed. The centurion looked at me across the reeds. Not blame, demand. How do we fight a man using our own habits, our pride, and my inventions against us? The answer began with humiliation. No immediate rescue without shield cover. No pursuit without flank watchers. No torch signal accepted unless paired with horn count. Soldiers hated rules that made courage wait. They hated them less after carrying back the dead helper. Blood makes patient men out of the survivors standing closest to the stretcher. The quiet officer and I built a counter-trap that afternoon. A visible weak gap near the salt wagon, a hidden watch above it, and false tracks leading toward an empty ration cart. If Soda's scouts followed my earlier style, they would notice the gap, reject it as bait, and choose the path that looked accidentally messy. That was where the real net waited. The plan felt clean enough to worry me. Clean plans invite clever enemies to wipe their feet on them. Still, the general approved because doing nothing had begun to look like fear. Night came heavy and windless. The salt wagon sat under a poor guard display. 2 men pretended to dice beside it, badly enough that any observer would smell bait. Movement came from the brush after moonrise, not toward the salt. 3 shadows circled wide, found the messy path, stopped, and retreated before entering the net. Soda had seen the second layer. Or worse, he had predicted that I would predict him. The shadows vanished uphill, leaving the trap untouched and the camp holding its breath. Then a horn sounded from the west, not east. While we watched the clever path, another team cut into the grain mule line from the dull side nobody had dramatized. That was his answer. Clever men overvalue cleverness. Guard the simple side too. 1 mule died, 2 bags were slashed, and a fire pot cracked under a wheel before the raiders fled. The general did not shout after the damage count. That silence was worse. He looked at the burned grain, then at me, understanding that my mind had been used as terrain. I fixed the rule before dawn. Every bait plan now needed equal guard on the boring route. No trap was allowed to steal attention from plain doors, ropes, and hungry men. The centurion made the soldiers repeat it aloud. Watch the clever path, watch the stupid path, watch the place nobody praises you for watching. Ugly rhythm, useful memory. Soda sent no message the next day. He sent evidence. Scouts reported enemy latrines moved downhill from wells, water pots covered, fires set for boiling, and sick tents separated. My mouth dried as the report continued. Their camp had fewer stomach cases than before. March trash was buried. Dead animals were burned away from water. Soda had scaled my mercy. That should have been good for human life. Healthier enemy soldiers still became sharper blades pointed at us. Improvement had crossed the line without asking which side deserved clean water. Worse, the enemy marched faster. With sickness reduced and water counted properly, they crossed ground our officers believed should slow them for another entire day. The quiet officer recalculated with me. Old estimate, 2 days. New estimate, tonight if they cut baggage and move light. Sota had copied my forced march logic and stripped it leaner. We rushed defenses at the river camp, double guards, covered jars, salt moved inward, probe lines set near reeds. Every system now assumed Sota knew the first draft. The soldiers felt the pressure without understanding the math. Men spoke softer, fires burned lower. Even Silver Ring stopped smiling while scouts argued over tracks near the western ford. Damos brought water to the wounded carts and whispered that slaves knew two truths now. Rome chained bodies. Soda burned the bodies around chains. They watched which truth reached them first. That sentence followed me to the command table. It was the whole war in slave grammar. Control from inside, destruction from outside, and everyone weak crushed between methods. Near sunset, the west picket found a row of stones arranged beside the ford. Not Roman markers, not random river scatter. A count, 8, then 4, then 1 blackened bone. I understood before the scout finished speaking. 8 squads, 4 signal fires, 1 main strike. Or maybe that was what Soda wanted me to think. The numbers had become a knife. Horns sounded from the ridge before darkness fully fell. Enemy fires appeared in 4 places at once, then moved downhill faster than sick troops should move. Soda had arrived one night early. Renji's advantage had become a shared language, and Soda spoke it with cleaner cruelty. The enemy copied his sanitation, improved the march, and reached the ford before Rome was ready. Horns rolled down from the western ridge before the last light left the ford. 4 enemy fires moved in separate lines, and every Roman officer suddenly hated the darkness. Soda had reached us early by cutting sickness, cutting baggage, and cutting mercy from the march. His army moved like a leaner version of the machine I had built for Rome. The general wanted the main line at the ford. Silver Ring wanted me locked near the command tent. The centurion chose neither argument and shoved me toward the unfinished defenses. 4 fires did not mean 4 attacks. That was the first thought I forced through panic. Fires are language. Soda knew I could read numbers, so the numbers might be bait. I marked the ford with 3 stones, then placed 1 behind the mule line. The boring route, the stupid path, the place nobody praised you for watching. That rule had to live. The quiet officer saw the rear stone and nodded once. Runners moved before pride could object. Half the reserve stayed behind the supply carts instead of chasing the brightest flames. Enemy horns answered from the slope. Men appeared at the ford, shields low, torches high, loud enough to pull every frightened eye forward. Soda's show had good rhythm. Then a mule screamed behind us. The rear reserve met shadows cutting through reed beds near the water jars. Knives flashed in the dull place Soda hoped Rome would forget. The first layer held badly, which still meant held. 2 Romans died beside the jars, but the buckets stayed covered, and a runner reached command before fire touched the grain. I ran toward the rear line with mud swallowing my borrowed sandals. A spear point stopped me once, then dropped when the centurion's voice struck the guard from behind. The raiders had wrapped cloth around their feet to muffle steps. Good idea, poor mud choice. Their prints widened near the jars, showing where weight shifted before each knife thrust. I pointed to the prints, then to the dark grass beyond the mule line. The centurion sent 3 men left, not forward. They caught the second team crawling toward the salt wagon. Soda's attack failed to burn the camp, but it found weak skin everywhere. The ford line shouted too late. The rear jars almost fell. 2 signal runners carried the same message differently. By dawn, we still had grain, water, and mules. We also had 7 dead, 12 wounded, 1 burned cartwheel, and proof that our camp was a sketch, not a fortress. The general wanted immediate pursuit. I placed a broken arrow on the map, then 3 grain kernels behind it. Chase now, lose food. Guard now, keep army. My fingers stayed flat. He stared at the kernels longer than he liked. Soda had given us a siege without walls. Every step outside camp could become a purchase paid in water, mules, and men. The general gave me one command: build. Not freedom, not trust, build. The word crossed language cleanly because the entire camp now stood inside the problem. A Roman camp already knew order, but order for marching differs from order for surviving pressure. I needed layers, not neatness. Systems, not heroic men standing in pretty lines. First came the water spine. Clean jars moved to the center, raw water to the edge, boiling pots between them, guards at each transfer, and clay symbols repeated on every lid. Second came the double ditch. The outer one slowed feet. The inner one controlled direction. Between them, stakes stood low enough to catch ankles and hidden enough to punish rushing. Soldiers wanted the ditch deeper. Deeper took time we did not own. I marked the goal with a hand chop. Not stop forever, buy minutes, bend movement, make attackers arrive broken. Minutes became the word I taught by tapping my wrist, then moving stones from outer ditch to inner line. 1 minute for horns, 3 for shields, 5 for reserves. The quiet officer copied that into Latin. Men understood then. A ditch did not need to be glorious. It needed to sell enough time for a tired soldier to find his helmet. Watch rotations shortened again. Complaints came like flies. I answered with 2 buckets of water, making tired guards carry them across mud after 4 hours, then after 2. The difference spoke. 2-hour guards spilled less, cursed less, and noticed more. The centurion made the test public. After that, every man hated the rotation while obeying it with cleaner eyes. Signal fires moved from obvious posts to protected pits behind shields. Flames could rise when needed, but until then they stayed hidden. A signal visible too early is a gift to an enemy. Horn codes changed. 1 blast for sighting, 2 for rear movement, 3 for fire, long low for false signal suspected. Every tower repeated until mistakes sounded embarrassing. Sota had copied our first code. Good. Let him own a dead language. A system must shed skin when the enemy learns its old pattern. Deimos organized slave crews before I gestured twice. He split diggers by strength, jar carriers by steadiness, old men by memory, and boys by speed. Rome saw labor. He saw people. That made the work faster and the danger sharper. The quartermaster noticed slaves looking to Deimos, Deimos looking to me, and orders moving before his shouting found a target. Silver Ring noticed too. He walked the ditch line with clean sandals, avoiding mud as if law itself might keep him dry. His eyes measured loyalty more carefully than trench depth. I ignored him because the camp had a larger throat open. Grain caches needed spreading. 1 burned shed should not starve an army, so sacks moved into 3 guarded pits. The quartermaster fought the order until I tipped 1 basket and let grain spill through my fingers. 1 pile burns, 3 piles survive. His face said he understood and hated me for it. Clay ovens were built low and partly covered, so smoke spread thin under brush screens. Breakfast smoke had betrayed armies before. Now even boiling water had to hide its breath. Latrines shifted again, farther from water and downwind from sleep areas. Men cursed the longer walk. Then I made them count 6 stones from the old camp, and curses lost strength. The priest blessed the new trenches before anyone used them. This time, I let him stand first. If his ash helped men stop fouling near water, the ash could earn its place. He disliked my permission more than my resistance. A stolen ritual still feels powerful. A tolerated one becomes a tool, and even priests can smell when a tool handle changes hands. By the second night, the camp looked uglier and worked better. Ditches cut crooked shadows, shield stacks waited at angles, water jars wore clay marks, and every path had a purpose. Sota tested us before midnight. A single torch appeared east, high and clean, matching our dead code. 1 guard almost answered, then remembered the long, low horn for suspected false signal. The horn moaned across camp. Nobody cheered when the false torch vanished. The silence after it felt like a past exam where the wrong answer would have stabbed someone. An hour later, arrows fell into the outer ditch. Not many, enough to make men duck and reveal where fear had placed them. Sota was mapping reactions, not spending ammunition. I ordered shield stacks moved after the volley. Men groaned at shifting wood in darkness, but a position revealed once must be treated as already owned by enemy eyes. At dawn, scouts found ash marks on 3 trees facing our new bucket route. Sota had marked it overnight. The route changed before breakfast reached the first bowl. That became the siege pattern. Build, test, patch, signal, trick, change. Every useful rule had a lifespan measured by how fast Sota could observe, copy, and cut into it. Sleep became a ration like grain. The general received more. Guards received less. I received fragments stolen beside map tables, waking whenever a horn, cough, or drop jar changed pitch. On the 3rd day, rain turned the outer ditch into a brown channel. Good for slowing feet, bad for collapsing walls. A section near the mule line sagged before noon. Roman pride wanted to rebuild it straight and deep. Mud wanted something else. I ordered woven branches pressed into the side, packed with straw and clay, ugly enough to make engineers wince. The patch held through the next rain. That mattered more than beauty. Sota's men would attack what looked weak, and our weak places needed to become hungry mouths. We shaped 1 sagging section to invite entry, then lined the inner turn with concealed stakes and a side fire pot. The camp learned to turn damage into bait before shame fixed it. Sota struck that section at dusk. 3 men entered, saw the turn too late, and pulled back before the fire pot broke. He had expected us to weaponize failure. Good. His retreat left a rope tied to a stake beyond the ditch. When a Roman reached for it, Damos shouted first. The rope led under mud to a hooked blade set for fingers. Damos saved a hand because slaves understand traps disguised as gifts. The centurion saw it, then ordered him assigned to inspection crews. Rome promoted him by giving him more danger. Damos accepted with one cloudy-eyed glance at me. His status had risen because my system needed him. In Rome, every rise carried a hook under the heel. The wounded tent filled faster than I liked. Our defenses saved supplies, not skin. Men arrived with arrow cuts, infected rope burns, twisted ankles, and fear hidden under jokes. Clean wound stations became mandatory. Boiled cloth, separated tools, dirty bandage pit, hand washing with ash and water. The first soldier who skipped washing lost his wine ration. Punishment worked where lectures died. By evening, men washed because wine mattered. Their wounds improved because biology did not care which motivation delivered clean hands. Soda answered by shooting clay pots instead of soldiers. One arrow shattered a cooling jar, wasting half a morning's boiled water. Another broke a vinegar amphora and soured the dust. We built jar shields from wicker and scrap planks. Thin, cheap, movable. The quartermaster called them ridiculous until the next arrow stuck in wicker instead of clean water. Every solution consumed something. Wood for shields meant less firewood. More boiling meant more smoke risk. More guards meant more fatigue. Defense was a table where every cup borrowed from another. I kept the ledger open. Water, grain, wood, vinegar, cloth, arrows, sleep. The general stopped asking whether we could hold. He asked which resource would fail first. The answer changed daily. Rain helped water but hurt ditch walls. Wind hid smoke but dried throats. Enemy arrows spent shields. Sick mules spent men. Nothing stayed solved. On day 4, Soda sent no attack. That absence frightened me. A quiet enemy is either tired, dead, or building a better question. Soda had not earned the first two options. We used the silence to dig emergency gates. Not glorious gates. Narrow exits hidden behind stacked brush. Wide enough for runners, wounded carts, or a sudden strike if the main path burned. The general disliked hidden exits because retreat language poisoned morale. I placed a cup beside the map, covered every opening except one, then poured water until the table flooded. He watched the water seek the only route. Armies do the same under pressure. Leave one exit and panic owns it. Leave 3 controlled exits and command can still breathe. The emergency gates were approved. Silver Ring wrote nothing on his tablet, which meant he was saving the information for a better moment. Paper can ambush later than arrows. That evening, the priest tried to lead a victory chant near the central water jars. Men joined weakly. Their eyes kept drifting to the ditches, horn posts, and covered caches. Faith had competition now. Not from disbelief, but from repeated survival. A man who lived because a horn code worked will still pray, but he also checks whether the horn is dry. Soda broke the quiet after midnight with livestock. 3 goats, panicked and burning with pitch on their backs, were driven toward the outer ditch, dragging sparks into dry brush. Cruel, cheap, effective. The goats did not understand war, which made them perfect delivery tools. 2 fell into the ditch. 1 cleared it and ran toward the grain cache. The bucket boys moved exactly as trained. 1 threw water too early and missed. Another waited for the goat to hit the ash line, then soaked the ground before fire could climb. The animal screamed until a soldier killed it with a spear. Nobody joked after that. Soda had reminded the camp that systems can work and still leave ugly sounds in the dark. We widened fire breaks before sunrise. Dry grass vanished. Oil jars moved again. Pitch, rope, and spare cloth were stored separately. If everything burns together, storage has become a suicide pact. The quartermaster began anticipating my orders by then, which annoyed us both. He moved salt before I pointed, raised sacks before rain, and glared at me as if competence were contagious. Good. A system survives only when enemies can kill the designer and the routine keeps moving. That thought arrived quietly, then stayed like a stone inside my chest. If Rome understood the same thing, my value would drop from irreplaceable mind to training source, safer maybe, or easier to chain and transport once the lessons were copied. Silver Ring had been waiting for that transition. On the 5th morning, he requested copies of every board, every symbol, every ration ledger, and every signal rule. The request sounded administrative. It was extraction. Take the method, reduce the boy, make the machine portable, then decide whether the living part should stay with the army or the state. I gave the scribe enough to keep men alive and held back small details that made systems breathe. Who checked whom, when fatigue lied, which slave crews could carry trust faster than orders. The quiet officer noticed the omissions. He said nothing. Later, he placed a blank tablet near me and tapped it once. Not command, question, how much of the system lived unwritten? My answer was Damos crossing the yard before an order, a bucket boy checking ash lines without being told, a guard blowing long low at a suspicious torch. People had become memory. He followed my gaze and understood. That made him dangerous in a better way. Officers who see people as memory can protect a system or erase the people to own it. Soda's next message arrived tied to an arrow that landed near the map tent. Japanese on bark, sealed with mud. He had watched enough to know where my eyes would be dragged. You are teaching them to survive chains, the message said. I am teaching them chains burn. When Rome owns your machines, they will not need your conscience. I read it twice before translating. The accusation was not new. The timing was. Silver Ring's copy request lay on the table beside Soda's bark, like two hands closing from opposite sides. The general demanded the full meaning. I gave it. Let Rome hear the insult plainly. Sometimes hiding a blade only makes the handle easier for someone else to grab. The tent erupted. Silver Ring called Soda a rebel animal. The priest called him cursed. The centurion asked how close he had been to shoot the message accurately. That question mattered most. The arrow's angle meant the shooter had reached the low ridge north of camp. Inside a zone our watch rotation treated as covered by sight, not patrol. Covered by sight was a lazy phrase. Sight ends at brush, fog, boredom, and the moment a guard believes a place is already handled by someone else's eyes. Patrol loops changed within the hour. Overlap zones replaced clean borders. Every watch post had to see the next man move, not assume he existed because a board said so. Soda attacked the old blind seam that night. He found overlap instead. Two Roman horns sounded from different angles, and his small team withdrew before reaching throwing range. For the first time, the camp felt ahead of him by half a breath. Not victory, half a breath. Enough for a man to raise a shield before the knife entered. The general slept 3 hours after that. The centurion allowed himself 1 cup of watered wine. Damos smiled at nobody while replacing a broken jar lid with a better one. I should have felt relief. Instead, my ledger showed wood falling faster than expected, wound cloth low, vinegar nearly halved, and mule feed stretched thin enough to snap in 2 days. Defending a camp is not holding a heroic line. It is noticing that the cloth-saving infected legs will run out before arrows do, then choosing who gets clean fabric first. We cut tunics from the dead for bandages. Romans hated it until the wounded stopped bleeding through dirty scraps. Dignity loses arguments when fever starts counting. On the 7th morning, Soda's fires vanished from the ridge. Scouts found abandoned pits, buried ash, and tracks splitting north. He had ended the pressure before we could claim success. That meant he had gained what he came for: measurements, reaction times, weak seams, proof of our new codes, and the knowledge that the camp could adapt faster than before. The general called it a failed enemy siege. I called it a completed enemy lesson. Both statements could stand in the same mud and point at different bodies. Repairs began immediately. Men straightened stakes, patched ditch walls, counted arrows, dried cloth, refilled jars, and spoke with the exhausted calm of people still alive by procedure. Then the southern road raised dust, not enemy dust. Organized, slow, escorted. Roman standards appeared first, then fresh horses, polished armor, and a covered litter guarded like treasure. Silver Ring's expression changed before anyone announced them. Relief, ambition, and hunger crossed his face in quick order. Law had arrived with witnesses, and he had been waiting. The Senate envoy entered camp near noon, wearing white bordered with purple, clean enough to look unreal among mud, ash, and men who had not slept properly for a week. Behind him walked scribes carrying sealed tablets. Behind them came 2 guards with chains wrapped in red cloth, as if decoration could make iron less honest. The general met the envoy beside the command fire. No one sat. Even the priests stepped back. Rome's battlefield power and Rome's legal power measured each other in public silence. The envoy read from a tablet in polished Latin. I caught fragments before the quiet officer translated: foreign asset, state custody, immediate transfer, strategic monopoly, protection of Roman interests, strategic monopoly. That phrase needed no full grammar. Rome had decided my mind was a resource like salt, iron, or grain, and resources belonged wherever the Senate could count them. The centurion's hand moved to his sword, then stopped. Soldiers watched him. Slaves watched me. Silver Ring watched everyone, already choosing which reactions would become evidence. Damos stood near the central jars with both hands empty. Around him, water carriers, bucket boys, wounded men, and ditch workers froze inside the system we had built together. The envoy pointed at me without looking at my face. One guard unfolded the red cloth from the chains. The iron beneath was clean, heavy, and sized for a living throat. My camp still stood because every gate, ditch, jar, horn, and ration mark had done its job. Rome looked at that survival and reached for the person it could legally carry away. Renji had turned the camp into a machine that survived Soda's siege, but Rome arrived with a stronger weapon than fire. A Senate order named him state property, and the chains opened. The chains opened with a clean metal sound, too neat for the mud around them. The envoy pointed at my throat, and every system I had built seemed to pause around that gesture. His scribes stood behind him with sealed tablets held high, as if wax could command hunger, wounds, and fear. The camp watched Law arrive where arrows had failed to carry me away. The general did not give the order at once. His eyes moved from the chains to the ditches, then to the covered water jars, counting how much of the camp now ran through my hands. Before the collar touched skin, a horn screamed from the northern ridge. One blast, then two, then a broken third. Not our code. A warning from a tower already under attack. Soda had waited for Rome to divide itself. Law pulled my guards inward. Officers argued near the command fire, and the enemy struck the seam between obedience and survival. Smoke rose beyond the mule line. 4 small fires, low and moving, not meant to blind us. They marked squads advancing under wet shields toward the weakest rebuilt ditch. The envoy shouted for the transfer to continue. The general shouted for the line to form. Between them, the centurion shoved the chain aside and put a mapboard into my hands. My eyes went to the boring route first. Sota knew that rule by now, which meant he might attack the praised path, the stupid path, and the place I protected because he knew I would. I marked a false retreat from the western gate, then tapped the inner ditch twice. Let him see fear. Let him push. Let the camp bend without breaking until his front rank stretched thin. The general hated retreat marks, even false ones. His pride flared for one breath. Then the northern tower burned brighter, and pride lost to arithmetic on a muddy board. The quiet officer translated fast. Open west gate halfway. Pull shield line back 10 paces. Hide reserves near the grain pits. Keep bucket crews central, not chasing flames. The centurion turned those marks into voice. Men moved because he commanded, but the pattern was mine, and everyone near the command fire understood why the collar still lay open. Damos took the slave crews without asking permission. Jar boys, ditch patchers, stretcher teams, ash line watchers. People moved into the memory we had built before law could name it treason. The Senate guards stepped toward me again. A Roman veteran blocked them with his shield lowered, face blank. He had once called my traps coward work. Now he guarded the coward. Heh. Enemy drums rolled from the ridge. Soda wanted urgency to break the camp into simple habits. Brave charge, easy chase, open gate, burned grain, captured foreign boy. The first wave hit the outer ditch and found it softer than expected. That was deliberate. Mud collapsed under their weight, making the line look broken enough to invite more men forward. We let the outer ditch fail in 3 places. Each failure pulled attackers toward lanes where inner stakes weighted low, shield stacks angled sideward, and archers held fire until knees jammed. The false retreat worked too well. Some Roman soldiers cursed as they stepped back, believing command had lost nerve. Then enemy fighters flooded the gap and discovered the lane narrowing behind them. Soda's men carried hooks for stakes and wet hides for firepots. He had prepared for the camp I built yesterday. The problem for him was that yesterday's camp had already died. A burning cart rolled toward the grain pits. The bucket boys stayed central instead of chasing it. When the cart hit the ash line, water struck the ground before flame could climb. An enemy squad slipped through reeds toward the clean jars. The slave inspection crew found them first, using probe poles meant for traps. One pole caught cloth, one caught a wrist. Damos drove a shovel into the mud beside the lead raider's foot, pinning his sandal long enough for a soldier to strike. His cloudy eye never left the next shadow. The main enemy body reached the inner ditch at sunrise. There, the ground rose just enough to slow shields, and the ditch turned left while their momentum kept trying to go forward. Archers fired from grain stacks, not towers. Soda's men raised shields toward the obvious height and took arrows from the side, the same lesson he had studied and now paid for. The ground did half our killing. Men slipped, shoved, recovered, then found spears waiting where balance failed. My design spent mud, angles, and impatience before spending Roman bodies. Soda changed the attack after the first line broke. Horns called his rear units away from the false gate and toward the emergency exit hidden behind brush near the southern carts. That was clever enough to hurt. He had found the exit by watching cart movement, not markers. A secret used twice leaves footprints, even when every man involved pretends otherwise. My hand slapped the southern gate mark. The centurion saw it before I finished. Reserves turned through the camp center, shields low, running past water jars and wounded men. The general's cavalry waited behind the southern carts under wet canvas. When Soda's flanking squad forced the brush, the canvas dropped, and horses burst forward into men expecting a gap. The fight became close after that. Systems bought the shape, but iron finished the argument. Men screamed beside broken wheels, and mud swallowed sandals from both armies without choosing sides. My ledger lived in my head while the battle moved. West Gate holding, South Gate sealed, water safe, grain safe, wounded rising, arrows low, reserve tired, Centurion bleeding left arm. Soda's banner appeared on the ridge near mid-morning, a black cloth strip tied to a spear. I never saw his face, only the place from which the next horn changed direction. The Centurion charged when the horn exposed him, not blindly. He took 20 shield men through the lane we had kept empty for retreat, then turned it into a knife toward the ridge. The veteran with the old grudge carried the front shield. An arrow struck it and stayed. He kept walking, step by step, until the line behind him reached the slope. By noon, Soda's attack cracked, not destroyed, but forced to leave the field without grain, without clean water, and without me. His rear horns called withdrawal through smoke. Victory arrived without music. It came as enemies climbing away, Romans too tired to pursue, and bucket boys sitting in mud with empty jars hugged against their chests. 29 Romans were dead, 11 slaves, 4 mules, 2 grain pits damaged, 1 water station broken. The camp survived, but the cost lay in rows where flies had already gathered. Rome cheered after the numbers, because armies must cheer or admit what victory eats. I stood by the shattered jar line and counted bandage cloth before counting any praise. The envoy returned while blood was still wet near the southern gate. His white border was smeared now, but his voice had recovered. Law, he believed, did not bleed with soldiers. The Senate order was read again. State custody, immediate transfer, strategic monopoly. The words stepped over dead men, broken jars, and the ditch lines that had kept those words alive. The general's face hardened. He had used my system to survive, but Rome stood behind the envoy, older than any battlefield debt. His silence stretched until everyone heard its limit. Silver Ring moved beside the envoy, careful as ever. He pointed at the slave crews first, then the soldiers watching them, proving that my influence had grown beyond military convenience. My gaze found Damos near the wounded carts. Rope burns had reopened on his wrists. Beside him stood bucket boys, ditch workers, stretcher carriers, and men who had learned to survive by procedure. Damos stepped forward first, empty hands, muddy tunic, cloudy eye fixed on the envoy. He did not shout. He simply stood between the chains and the water jars. The bucket boys followed, then wound carriers, then the old slave who remembered jar symbols. Their line looked weak until the soldiers behind them stopped pretending not to watch. A saved archer stepped beside Damos with one arm bandaged to his chest. Then the veteran with the arrow in his shield, then 2 mule handlers, 3 diggers, and a tower guard. The centurion did not join them. He also did not move them aside. His sword stayed in its sheath, and in that stillness the envoy finally understood the order had reached mud. The general saw the split forming before the envoy did. Army on one side, Senate law on the other, and a foreign prisoner standing where both needed the same breath to continue. The envoy ordered my arrest. His guards advanced 3 steps before shields lowered across their path. Nobody attacked. Nobody yielded. The camp became a blade held flat between 2 hands. I took the Senate tablet from the map table. Wax seal, clean script, ownership polished into law. The same Rome I had saved had written a cage precise enough to survive battle. The command fire still burned low beside the tent. I held the tablet over it until the wax softened, then until the edge caught. The envoy screamed before the seal dropped into ash. The centurion threw me an iron key without looking at me. It struck the mud near my foot. One practical motion, one impossible permission, one choice made too late to take back. I unlocked Damos first, then the nearest water carrier, then the wounded archer's wrist chain. Each open ring made the envoy's voice smaller, and the camp's silence heavier. The western gate stood half-broken from the false retreat. I walked to it with the burned order in one hand and the key in the other, while soldiers and slaves formed ranks behind me. My hand lifted the bar. Wood scraped, hinges groaned, and the road beyond the camp opened toward smoke, enemy hills, and a future no classroom map had ever drawn.
Renji burned Rome's ownership order, opened the camp gate, and took the first step with slaves, soldiers, and engineers behind him. That day, Rome lost a prisoner and gained a rival legion. Thank you for watching this video all the way through. There are even more stories waiting for you ahead. I wish you all the best and see you next time.